Ladies and gentlemen, we are live. MythVision podcast. Let's do a 30-second countdown. Let some people start trickling in. I'll do my little intro, and then we'll have our discussion. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm the host, Derek Lambert, and this is Michael Jones from Inspiring Philosophy. We have two totally different worldviews, but we're going to have a very kind conversation. I know you guys have been looking forward to something like this, so we're going to do that. But first, I want to introduce you to some of the characters that are involved in MythVision. They've been paying close attention to the things that Derek Lambert's been doing over here, but, you know, don't take my word for it. Let's have an eyewitness testimony here.
Very nice.
We are MythVision. Welcome back to MythVision podcast. Derek Lambert here. Michael Jones over there. What's up, Mike?
Hi, how you doing? Thanks for having me on.
It's good to meet you finally. I can't compete with your editing skills, so I had my good friend Jonathan McClatchy create that, or not McClatchy, sorry, Jonathan Sheffield. Sorry.
Oh, I was going to say McClatchy made that.
No. He doesn't have those skills on that.
I was like, wow, I didn't realize he was a fan.
The reason I got confused with his name, I did this the other day when I was setting up the debate. They're doing a mark and priority debate here in July. Dr. Goodacre and Sheffield. But Jonathan is like, I know very few Jonathans. I know a lot of Johns. And so I got him confused. But how long have you known about my channel? How long have you how long has it come onto your radar?
Well, I mean, I get mentioned so much, I figured I should eventually come on. But actually, the first thing I watched you was on, you had Chris Hansen and Robert Price on. And that was like, Chris Hansen at that point, him and I were talking a lot, and he was sending me a lot of material to read. So I just watched his interview anyway with him. But yeah, it was like 2019 or something. And I think that was the first thing I ever watched because, you know, that's when Chris and I were talking on. He was sending me so much to read.
Yeah. Welcome everybody to the chat. Digital Gnosis, our good friend. He's also had you on for a debate not too long ago. Mm-hmm. Well, I've known about you for quite some time. I think the first video that really red flagged me about your work is you did a monotheism video, a documentary, trying to say that, you know, the Aborigines had a monotheistic view of God or something like that. And
some of them did. Some, not all. Yeah.
This is something I was looking at and I said, hold on. This guy's editing was really good. You only had 100K subscribers approximately at that time, though. So I don't know what you did and how you did it, but you're up to 200 now, 207 or something like that.
Yeah, it's exponential growth. YouTube is exponential. So like it took me like 2 years to get 5,000, and then like the next year I had 20,000. So you grow the bigger you get is what I found.
Well, everybody, if you don't already know, and I'm sure you know Michael Jones, this is his YouTube channel. I thought it was 207. Go hit that subscribe button, hit the bell. You guys, he does really quality edits. Whether you agree with his work or not, you got to give the guy some credit here. This is really, really well-edited content. And sometimes I go to it looking and going, all right, so some of the scholars you list, I'm interested in setting up conversations between guys they disagree with to see, you know, how do they stand up to the ideas that are being presented and things like that. I'm no expert in anything. I said that up front. I'm just a guy who wants to learn and continue to study. But I do have my biases, and I'm sure you do as well. We all do. And this should be a good conversation between you and me on our disagreements in particular, but also on our similarities, what we have in common, and showing that interfaith dialogue from an atheist like me, a God hater to some Christians, depending on how serious.
Oh, I am a God hater to some Christians too. Don't worry.
Well, let's just show it can be done. And I think that's important. Also, I released some videos, ladies and gentlemen, on Patreon again. Ex-Pentecostal, serious. The cult was intense. She describes her experience leaving. James the Egyptian, Jacob Berman, James Stevens Valiant. And I also interviewed Bart Ehrman yesterday. Again, we did a thing on textual criticism for the first 30 minutes or so, and then the failed apocalyptic preacher Jesus, or prophet Jesus, if you will. For those critics and skeptics, go check out MythVision Patreon. That's how we keep the lights on. Enough about me and enough about promoting. I just want people to know they can go over there, check this stuff out early. You have a Patreon as well?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, that's my how I keep going.
Awesome. Well, if you guys are obviously inspired by this, that's a way to help Michael out. And you can also personally harass him on his Patreon. He invites you to do so, right?
I'm a glutton for punishment. That's why I do YouTube.
First things first, you're in this, I like to call a gray area of Christianity. You are seriously pushing the limits within the evangelical world. Why don't you just come on over and join the dark side?
Do you have cookies?
We don't have.
Okay, then no.
But serious, bold, blunt question up front. I've got to list a few questions. I want this to be a conversation, not a strict, rigorous, buy this thing and this and that. There are going to be some things I do want to bring up and maybe get your opinion on. But Michael, I'm an atheist now. I once believed I was really, really involved in fundamentalist Christian church, non-denominational for many years. I became a very staunch Calvinist by looking at predestinarian concepts and things like that. And I said, holy crap, man, Paul's pretty tough in Romans 9 and other places, and I tried systematically, theologically to conclude what was going on. You kind of ignore anything that might be universal. You might interpret it in a universal limited context or whatever it might be, how Calvinists may be. And finally now, and I'm skipping so much content here, I'm a skeptic. I'm somebody who doubts these things. I don't believe them anymore. I say I'm an atheist. I don't believe in a God. If there is a God out there, there could be. I don't deny that there couldn't be. I just don't find the evidence plausible to me. Am I going to hell?
Well, I don't know. That's, to me, is when people ask me that, it's hard for me to say, because I don't like psychoanalyzing people.
Right.
I don't like saying, and I also don't feel that death is necessarily the last choice you get on my worldview. I talk about this a little bit on my video of hell. Hell is like a freely chosen identity built on something else besides God going on forever, to quote Tim Keller. So it's not so much this idea that, time's up, you lose kind of attitude, all right, you failed the test kind of thing. It's much more complicated. So I hope universalism is true. I've been asked about 3 times to debate a universalist, and I won't do it because I don't want to be wrong on that. I really want the universalist to be right. So I won't do it. So that's what my hope is. And then I don't really know what's going to happen. I agree with, evangelical scholar Jerry Walls, there's some sort of purgatory as well. You don't even have to, it's not like the Dante's, comedy type, purgatory, but there's some sort of limbo type thing in my worldview. So I'm okay with saying that, it's a little bit more complicated. It's a lot. I don't know if I can really break it all down in this entire hangout. But
I have to say, I've said this publicly, right, to many people. I'm fairly confident that what I'm reading here are narratives. People probably had subjective experiences. There's no telling, right? I'm fairly confident on that. I don't know with absolute. No one does. But for me, I've told people, they go, what would it take? And you have debated Matt Dillahunty, Aaron Ra, other hardcore atheists. And sometimes they I think if you put yourself in their shoes, you understand why they dodge this question, because they say, well, God knows what it would take. But I've said publicly, all it would take is a doubting Thomas scenario. I doubt that this is true. He could appear to me at any point, prove these things to me. I'd really want to check my mental faculties and make sure that I'm not like hallucinating? Because I was a drug addict for many years. How do I know this isn't chemical imbalance? How do I know there's not some hallucinatory something? You know what I mean? But
Mhm.
it would just require that. So I've heard you say, or at least one of my friends has heard you say in a debate, I think, on this topic of hell, they said you get like another chance potentially, or you hope that when you die, you know, there's this opportunity where you get to say, okay, look, now I see you're the true, this is true. I'm going to believe now. And then you can go to heaven.
Yeah, my view of hell is that the only people in hell are the people who want to be there. The doors of hell are locked from the inside, is what C.S. Lewis said. So if you read his book, The Great Divorce, that's kind of what that's about. It's everyone in hell doesn't want to go up there because they go up there, they have to submit. It's better to reign in hell than serve in heaven kind of mentality.
Huh.
So now, with your specific case, again, I don't know. I can't psychoanalyze you. A lot of times we say like things like, I would just need this, I would just need that. But a lot of times we don't really understand our own psychology. So like I like to tell myself that if enough evidence proved the resurrection was false, I would become an atheist. But I hope that's the way I would think. But I understand us humans, we are very emotional creatures.
Mhm.
When our beliefs are threatened, the reptilian part of our brain lights up and fight or flight response often kicks in. So we need to be honest with ourselves in terms of psychology. I mean, people go through years of therapy just to understand the bits of their own psychology, let alone someone else's. We're very complex creatures, and I think we need to be honest with ourselves in terms of our biases, like you mentioned before, and in terms of what would convince us. It's very complicated, and I'm trying very hard to recognize that about myself, not to try to project that onto anyone else, and try to understand where my biases are and what's holding me back. And I encourage everyone else to do the same kind of research. It's not as simple as we like to pretend, I would say.
Right. If you don't mind me mentioning, like, if that is the case, and of course, and I'm hypothesizing, let's just say the Christian worldview was true. I would hope what you're saying is true as well. But what if that is the truth? Then why would I need to believe now? Why don't I just, I'm enjoying life. I'm fairly happy with my family, my kids. And now that I've left, I feel a lot more freedom not having this. Maybe you'd say I had a horrible way of viewing things, too strict and literal, too fundamentalist, whatnot. I'm much happier now.
Well,
Why
I would
would
agree.
I need to believe? You know what I mean? Why would I need to when I'm going to go to heaven one day or meet God and he's going to say, all right, now you screw. I was hiding from you. This goes into divine hiddenness, but here it is now. You got the opportunity. I just can't see how anyone would come to, and I know this is also psychoanalyzing, but I can't see anyone getting there and going, dang it, you were real? I deny you. Send me to hell. Like, I don't know. It just,
Well, who's the guy, the head of the Freedom from Religion Foundation? Because he said if that ever happens, he would tell God to go to hell and walk out. Dan Barker said that once. Yeah, so some people do actually say that. And the response is simply like, yeah, if life was all just about happiness, I would agree. I don't think life is just about being happy. I think those come from a lot of cultural river, sort of flowing from a John Mills understanding of utilitarianism, that the aim of our society should be to increase happiness. Excuse me. Still morning over here, so my throat's a little, I don't want to like cough into the mic. But so, I mean, the response is not so much that wait until you're either in heaven or hell. The Christian response is you are either in heaven or hell right now. So I believe it was, I forget his name, Peter Kraft. He said, like, at the end, all the saints will say we've always been in heaven, and all those in hell will say they've always been in hell. The Christian response is heaven is to be with God. That is what is going to bring true fulfillment, true virtue building, true character development. And so why not enter into heaven now? Now, heaven is not going to be some sort of like little paradise where we're all going to sip martinis on a beach forever. I guess you don't have martinis on a beach. I guess it's margaritas on a beach.
But I don't see why not, though.
I just drink scotch, so I don't know. But it's going to be being with God. I don't think it ends that somehow, congratulations, now you have an eternal vacation. There's still growing to do. There's still sanctification to do. And a lot of people don't want to go through that complicated, hard process. Sanctification is hard. This is why I still think there's I agree with Jerry Walls, or some sort of purgatory state after life where we still have to purge off our sins, where we still have to go through these processes. Paul says we all have to stand before the judgment seat of God and give an account of everything we've done. That's a terrifying experience. And he's talking to Christians when he writes this. He's not talking to atheists or the pagans of the day. Christians, you're going to have to go through this horrible, hard process that's going to bring you to your knees. That terrifies a lot of people. Why would you want to go through that? So Jesus said, you become a Christian, you're going to have troubles. It's not going to be easy, but I will be with you through it all. That's the promise. So sure, I bet you are happy. I bet you do have a good life. The Christian should not deny that. The question is how long will it go on? C.S. Lewis talks about this in The Great Divorce. Everyone is building their identity on something. You're building your identity on your career, your family, a hobby you may have, your reputation. His argument is those will all eventually disintegrate you because they're not perfect. They will slowly, you'll need more of that to get more of the high, almost like a drug addiction. And eventually it will deteriorate you, and that's what hell is. Hell is the slow deterioration of your identity slowly eating away at you, unless it's put on a foundation that will last forever.
Well, let me tell you my own subjective experience with this, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
When I was a Christian, let me back up. My father was an alcoholic, hardcore special forces, Green Beret soldier, alcoholic. So I grew up with this addiction mentality from my parents. When I left religion 4 or 5 years ago, I felt not only freedom from, this mindset that God's going to judge me or judge the world one day, but also I felt like I had, if you will, purged myself of an addiction. I was truly addicted to religion. I was addicted to this mindset. So, and
I would say you actually I would say you went a step up. I would say get out of that mentality. Because
that's the first Christian who's ever actually.
Well, here's something C.S. Lewis talks about. He says sometimes the people who hate God are closer to God than some of those religious fundamentalists. They have built their identity not on God, but on their works.
Would
their
you say
religious
I hate
pride.
God, though?
No, not necessarily. I'm just using it as an analogy.
I'm just saying because you hear Christians say that all the time, and I'm like, no, I don't see that. But
so you got to think of it like this. There were some people, this is why Jesus was very critical of the Pharisees this day and was very nice to the prostitutes and the tax collectors. He understood that they had built their identity not on God, but on their own work ethic, on their own ritual ability to please God. God has to let me into heaven because I've done so good. So you know the story of the prodigal son. Mm-hmm. It's not really the story of the prodigal son. It's the story of the prodigal sons, plural. They're both prodigal, the older and the younger. The younger goes away, lives a rebellious life, comes back, is welcomed in. What does the older brother do? Well, he's angry. I have done all this work for you, Father. I have been in the field every day, and you welcome him back, and you kill the fattened calf. Where does he go? He's prodigal, but he goes out into the field where his works are. And the story ends not with him coming into the house to celebrate. The question is left open. Will he come in? Will he not? Because he's not in the house either. He's not in the heavenly space with the Father. He's out in the field of his own works, wondering why God has not come out to congratulate him. And the reason why the story ends on that cliffhanger is because that's a story presented to the Pharisees. This is you. You're out in your field of works. Are you going to come into the Father's house and accept that you're no better than those uncircumcised Gentiles you always are looking down upon? Because they're closer to my heart than you are, because you have built your identity around this pride you have, this of your own moral worth, and it's basically that of rags. So when people get out of that religious fundamentalist mindset, I'm like, yeah, no wonder. It's disintegrating you. It's slowly destroying you. It's not of what God wanted. That's never what God wanted. This is what Malachi talks about, what the prophet Amos talks about. Jesus talks about this, of course. Paul talks about this. Get out of that religious fundamentalist mindset that you can somehow work your way into God's favor. God shows no favor or no partiality to anyone. Christianity is not about that. Go out, welcome everyone with open arms. That's what the story of the prodigal son is supposed to be about.
Well, I wish more people took that advice and actually did that. Eric Johnson, thank you for the super chat. I love this conversation like this, or conversations like this. Good job, you two. And then we've got another super chat I want to go ahead and hit before we continue. Reality Revolutions, thank you. Will IP ever respond to Richard Carey responding to his godless engineer debate?
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, he did like a response where he went through a bunch of my arguments and like. I remember, it's been a while since I read it, so I don't know what he said. I remember thinking like, wow, the charitable response in this is ridiculous. Like at one point, I think I misspoke and said like the Battle of Kadesh when I meant like the Battle of Megiddo or vice versa. And Carey took that as like, see, he doesn't know what he's talking about kind of thing. And I'm like, or maybe I just misspoke because I was a live debate. So maybe I'll go through that. It's been a while since I thought about that, but yeah, I should probably go back and look at that eventually.
You look, man, I don't have all the answers. I'm no expert at anything. I don't know if you're particularly an expert in any particular field or with any credentials particularly, but
I'm an expert in facial hair.
facial hair. Look,
See,
I could compete if I tried, but
I was told I can't talk about how much bigger and more manly my beard is than yours, so I
you
won't
know
say
what?
that at all.
I was going to say, I've got one downstairs that's actually long. All right, I'm kidding. Thanks for the super chat, Reality. I appreciate it. Let me ask you something here. This is something I think is an important topic. You are part of the apologetics empire, or at least you kind of float in the circles with them. I think you're more on the fringe along the lines of the apologetics empire. But faith is a topic that gets brought up all the time.
I'm the anti-hero of the apologetic empire. I'm the Deadpool.
Well, look, we got to talk about faith, but Anthony Magnabosco, and go subscribe to his channel, Street Epistemology. You know who Anthony is, I'm sure. May I get your guest's current definition of sin, please?
Yeah, so the Bible talks about sin. I've seen scholars refer to it as missing the mark kind of thing. I kind of follow the philosophical understanding of that to Søren Kierkegaard, where it's like sin is building your identity on anything but God. So when you're missing the mark, you're trying to put something before God. So, you could, this is why, Matthew 7 talks about, not everyone who comes to me and says, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. The Bible says, I never knew you, because they missed the mark. They built their identity on they're serving God in certain ways. Like, I'm going to earn God's favor through these kind of works, not necessarily through accepting his grace, loving him, following him, doing what he asks of me kind of attitude. So sin is missing the mark. Søren Kierkegaard in Sickness Until Death talks about it as sort of like building your identity on anything but God. Now, if you want a longer explanation of that, that is basically what my video on hell is on. The title is, Does God Send People to Hell? And I go through that in a little bit more detail.
Okay. Thank you for that super chat. Faith. I'd like to mention a lot of apologists will use faith as they want to combine evidence into the faith. They want to say, look, faith is something that you have evidence for, therefore you can now have belief or hope in. And when I read Hebrews 11, for example, about these patriarchs and these people throughout the narrative from Cain and Abel all the way down throughout, Abraham had faith, so he obeyed God, and he was going to sacrifice his son. Of course, God doesn't let that happen by Hebrews 11 standard. To me, it's evident in Hebrews 11 that faith is this thing. Let me read you what I wrote here to kind of get more, because it's, what does it actually mean? Pistis, or it's true, believe it, trust it. Biblical faith is belief against evidence, Dr. Joshua Bowen would say. And he shows that it's a better idea of faith is that contrary to the evidence, one is to believe the unbelievable, so to speak. And Hebrews 11, point after point over and over, is that these people didn't have evidence, and these people trusted God contrary to the evidence. These people in Hebrews 11 believed these things were true. And what gets me, and I guess I look at John, the Gospel of John, blessed are those who don't see yet still believe. I think this is a polemic. I think the author's trying to say, you're not going to see this, but believe anyway.
Let me respond with two examples. One, you mentioned doubting Thomas, and then Hebrews 11 as well.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't see faith as contrary to evidence. I mean, in our typical understanding, we'd be like, I have faith in my bank to not steal my money because I've seen good evidence that they can be trusted, even if it's just from experience or whatnot.
I mean,
so even if our
what I mean?
Sure, yeah. I'm just talking about that. But let's talk about these two examples. So, doubting Thomas, blessed are those who believe and have none have seen. Well, remember the context of the story. Thomas is not told to believe without evidence. He's got people he's lived with for the past several years telling him, I have seen Jesus risen from the dead. And he still is doubting. He's got an empty tomb he can go check out, as the disciples have also checked out. So he has evidence. He just was being stubborn in the face of this sufficient evidence and wanted more. Hebrews 11, let me just read from ESV, starting in verse 17. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he had received the promise, was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom it was said, this is before Abraham offered him up, through Isaac your offspring will be named. Abraham considered that God was able to even raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did not receive him back. So that ends in verse 19. So what the author of Hebrews is telling us is that Abraham had evidence before he offered Isaac up, that God had already promised him that the offspring would come through Isaac. So if Isaac even died, God would be able to raise him back up because God was going to fulfill that promise anyway. Mm-hmm. So he had evidence to already place his faith in God in this test. It wasn't so much this idea that he just was doing it without any evidence. There was evidence already.
What evidence would you say there was for him? I mean, and by the way, what really gets me to start going down on the probability is that we're reading a text by people in Hebrews 11 who are reading or believing in a text from something in antiquity that, like, today we would look at some of these things and go, that didn't really happen literally as described.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying? So it's like, it should knock down our confidence level on what these are actually saying and how true this really is, in my opinion. Now, I know you might have a different take on this, but
that's fine, but that's not what I'm talking about. We're talking about an explanation of faith. So the author of Hebrews of Heaven,
right?
Well, so the author of Hebrews is not saying necessarily these are true. I get what you're coming at. He's just trying to describe what faith looks like. Okay. And one of his examples is Abram. Abram had evidence that God could raise, that God had already promised that Isaac was going to be the heir, that the offspring was going to come through him. So if God had told him to offer him up, he could reason from there that God could raise him from the dead because he still had to fulfill that promise that God had made. So that's, regardless of the truth or the reliability of that story about Abraham, the author of Hebrews is looking at this going, how I'm going to teach faith is through these examples I'm giving you. And in this one pretty clear example, Abraham did not believe without evidence. He had evidence, namely that God had already given him this promise. So there was reason to trust God. It's not so much fair to say that
Abraham or Abram, I get confused. Is the same thing. He had special revelation, and I don't mean like a text. The way it's described is that God sometimes even appears to him, depending on the source document you're looking at here. He appears, he shows up. She's going to be given birth in a time in which she shouldn't be giving birth. That's why I say, like, to me, it's like either God is granting faith by showing special revelation in particular, showing up, doing his due to make sure this person believes, or he has evidence from previous actions, like God made sure his wife at 100 years age, or 99, I can't remember exactly the number, gives birth. And trust me, this is why you're an interesting character, because most Christians buy those numbers, buy the narrative exactly as they are. We'll get into Exodus and Numbers and things like that, like it just kind of how you personally deal with them. I'm not here trying to stump you, or this is not my goal. I'm really trying to, like, give you where I come from and why I'm like, okay, hold on. It's like, it'd be one thing in Hebrews, the book of Hebrews, whoever authored this, I don't think it was Paul at all. And they're thinking, because they're religious Jews or religious Christians who might be Jewish Christians, might be not, just might be Christians. They believe in this. They've been primed, if you will, to believe in these narratives, and have faith that this is true and God is faithful. In fact, like Israel throughout history, God's going to save us from the Egyptians. God's going to save us from the Medes, the Persians, the list goes on, and all the empires that conquer them. They're a little nation, but they hold on to something that seems impossible. And at every turn, it doesn't even seem the most likely thing. They have faith. And I think Dr. Josh is like really hitting the nail on what biblical faith looks like. And that is like believing in things contrary to the reality of what looks like might be the case. Oh, Mary's pregnant. Well, it's hard to believe.
I understand where that's coming from. Like, I understand where that's coming from, because when you have faith, you obviously understand that, like, there could be contradictory evidence, but that doesn't mean there is no evidence for your faith. So the Jews this is one of the things the authors of Hebrews is doing, is like, look at Abraham, who was given this evidence, this promise from God. That's why he was able to trust God, because God was faithful in this instance. Look at these other people where God was faithful to them. God is going to be faithful with us as well. And we have previous evidence or examples to follow from. So yeah, faith is not, so again, to go back to the example of the bank, my bank could just steal all my money tomorrow. I mean, there's no way I could prove that. I can't watch my money 24/7, but I have good evidence to trust them and know they're not going to do that from prior experience, prior examples. So there's always going to be evidence for one way or the other, regardless of it. I mean, we can't have, absolute certainty on everything. So you place your trust in what you think is the most, and I guess in the biblical sense, you could place your faith or your trust in God, depending on how much evidence you think there is to actually trust him. So I get where you're coming from. There can be evidence to the contrary, but that doesn't mean there's no evidence on the other side either.
Yeah, no. And this is the thing, like, in that vein of the whole having faith, I'm sure you get where I'm coming from when I say like Hebrews 11 is looking at these characters and narratives that I'm sure you would even look at and go, yeah, that didn't happen as described here. There's probably another way of you looking at this stuff. It may not have actually happened in the way that the Hebrews 11 author actually thinks it. So to me, it's like, is the reliability, I mean, do you believe that Abraham actually had a child at 100, for example, or 101 with his wife? And do you think that this guy actually did everything that's described of him? And he
again, I did a video on Genesis 5 where I talk about how ages are used in the Bible. I don't think those are literal ages.
Right.
I think they're very much using them for symbolic purposes. I mean, there's a really interesting formula from Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then his name changer from Israel that I talk about in that video. They're using these numbers to sort of give their patriarchs praise.
Right.
Do I think Abraham was an old person when he had a kid? Yeah. 60, maybe 70. I mean, I think because the Bible does say it was like God ordained kind of thing, like it was a miraculous kind of birth, but I don't think you need to take those ages literally. And I appeal to the cultural context for that. It's one of the things I'm trying to hark on a lot is trying to read the Bible in its cultural context as best as possible. So when people say like, Christians are shying away from like similarities with like ancient literature, I'm like, no, I want to fully embrace that as much as possible.
Right.
But that doesn't mean I think they were plagiarizing or using certain Texas sources or whatnot.
Yeah.
And I think they were part of the cultural river that was flowing through the ancient Near East.
Well, I don't want to get off topic. We got some super chats. I want to take your guys' questions, of course. And some of these are my good friends. Topic discussed. Go subscribe to my friend Gary. I don't understand what IP means by evidence. What evidence does Abraham have, especially when we don't have evidence Abraham even existed?
So seems like they're two separate questions. So when I'm talking about Hebrews 11, I'm talking about the way the author of Hebrews is describing faith. So in the verses I cited, Abraham offers up Isaac, but he didn't do it blindly. He wasn't just like, oh, I don't know what's going to happen kind of thing. He had been given a previous promise by God that Isaac would be the offspring, that the promise that, the amount of heirs that Abraham would have would number the stars was going to come through Isaac. Now that could not happen if Isaac was dead. So the author of Hebrews says that that Abraham understood that God would have been able to raise Isaac from the dead to fulfill that promise. So Abraham could trust God offering Isaac up, knowing that regardless of what happened, Isaac was going to live at the end. And that's why I use the term raised from the dead kind of attitude.
Do you think that's the insertion of the Hebrews author? Because to me, it sounds like their recent Lord Jesus rose from the dead, according to the teachings of the Christians. But when I read the actual Old Testament, and I read that Abraham story, that isn't there. I'm not going to say that it couldn't have potentially been in the tradition, but it sounds like Hebrews inserts this idea that, well, Abraham knew that God would have rose him anyway.
It's commentary. It's obviously commentary that, they're adding different explanations onto what's kind of going on there. Mm-hmm. It's never actually stated in the Genesis text. I'm not saying that at all.
Right. And the more I'm looking at it, man, I'm like, okay, I want to approach this thing, and I'm very cautious to believe in an ancient book. We're coming from different points. I want to be respectful because I do see there's value. I did have a lot of value in this stuff. So real quick, David Samuel, my brother down under in Australia. I don't know how you're staying stuck to the earth. It's amazing how that happens on a flight.
It's going to fall off.
I just don't get how the Australians are still alive. It just doesn't make sense. I had to stay up and watch this. Good morning from Australia, guys. Love you, man. Thank you so much. David I can't tell you how much importance he is in helping me with my website and things like that. So he's a really good friend, Michael. Thanks a lot for the super chat. I personally have a lot, I guess when you go through all these filters, I'm very cautious on how much we should trust these things. And then another thing I look at is I'm looking at other people's faiths and beliefs and going, well, how can I say mine's is true, theirs isn't? You see where I'm coming from? What makes all the Vedic writings and their religion null and void, but Christianity is the right, true one, and everyone else is really wrong? Do you take that, or do you take kind of the universalistic 6 wise men of Hindustan parable and say, we're all kind of touching the elephant, we're blind, but there's an elephant. We don't know exactly how to describe it. Christianity's just one example. How do you now I'm putting you on the hot seat, aren't I? The Christians watching are going, he better say this is the only way, the truth, the life, and no one can get to the Father. Yeah. But Where do you stand on this, Michael? I mean, how do you?
Well, I love the story of the elephant and the blind men, because it's always told from the perspective of someone who's not blind. Everyone else thinks they know the truth, but really, I know the truth. There's actually an elephant there, so it's actually kind of like a self-defeating story, because they should be blind as well.
It's still a cool story, though. But yeah,
it's kind of an interesting perspective, though. No, I do. Again, I'm perfectly fine with saying Christianity is the true worldview. Just like you would be fine with saying naturalism or an atheistic perspective is the true worldview. Everyone has a worldview they think is most likely the true worldview. And that's where we are as humans. We need to debate and have these types of conversations to share ideas, and put our ideas up to public scrutiny. This is something I talk about in my video on divine hiddenness. We need to engage in these kind of conversations to test our worldviews. But again, I don't think that means everyone is somehow condemned, as we were talking about earlier. So Jesus, John 9:41, John 15:22 says, if I had not had come, they would not be guilty. But now that I have come, they have no excuse, talking about the Pharisees. Paul says something similar, Romans 5:13, wherever there is no law, there is no sin, but sin abounded anyway, kind of thing. This kind of idea that God is going to judge people based on the information they kind of have. It's not so much this idea that everyone's somehow condemned because they didn't get the right information, kind of thing. So I don't think that somehow means, like some Hindu is thrown into hell because he never heard of Jesus. C.S. Lewis said, honest rejection of Christ, however wrong, shall be forgiven and healed. So it's a little bit more complicated. It's not for me to say who's going to end up where. I don't know. I'm just doing my best, like you are, to try to figure out what the most correct worldview is. But I don't think that means that people are condemned for lack of information.
I know this is going to rabbit trail off a little. We'll get to divine hiddenness here soon, but Mark in priority, do you think Mark came first?
Yeah.
Okay. The development, of course, I'm sure you're aware of scholarship on this whole thing with the synoptic gospels and whatnot. Mark seems to carry a lot of Pauline theology. Matthew, though, seems to be Christian, like a Jewish Christian writing. They want to proselytize, make sure you circumcise to come on in, these type of things, it sounds like. Matthew 7, though, seems to be, and I just want your opinion on this. This is just what your thoughts are. It sounds like this guy's talking about Paul. Matthew 7, workers of lawlessness, this idea, I did this in your name, I did that in your name, all these things. It sounds like Matthew is preaching a Jewish Christianity, whereas he's correcting Mark's issues in his gospel. And Paul's actually teaching, no, you don't need to circumcise. Oh, foolish Galatians, who's bewitched you? Competing with other versions of Jewish Christianity that are trying to tell these Gentiles, you need to circumcise. What are your thoughts? To me, that makes so much sense. I just had Steve Mason on, really, really brilliant guy. Even Dr. Heiser quotes Steve Mason all the time, So I'm trying to use your like guys that are in the field of scholarship that are Christians to kind of support where I'm coming from. But do you think Matthew potentially could be talking about Paul here?
I mean, I would need to see a little more evidence of that. It sounds, I'm not going to say it's impossible. It's possible. There could be that sort of tension, but it's not explicit. So I remember I read a book one time where this book, actually, let me show you. I'm doing this for a comparison. This guy's arguing that Matthew and Luke, or I think Matthew and Luke came first, or maybe he argues Matthew came first. He might be arguing for traditional Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Okay. And like at one point, like Paul says, I'm sending to you a brother whose fame is known throughout the world. And he's like, well, who else could that be other than Luke? So obviously Luke's gospel must have already been written before this and I'm like, yeah, it's possible, but it's not explicit. Therefore, I don't think your argument is sufficient evidence there. So that's one of the reading that book is one of the reasons I rejected Matthew in priority, because I just thought the evidence was insufficient. So yeah, to compare that to Matthew 7, it's possible, but it's not nearly as explicit. And for me to be convinced of that, I would need a little bit more other than drawing these kind of comparisons.
There's a system that builds up to the statement I made, and I'm sure we don't have time. This isn't the point of this conversation, is like to build up this stuff. Yeah, I just wanted to bring to your attention, like, if that were the case, let's suppose it was. Now we're playing hypothetical. If Matthew's jabbing at Paul saying, you're going to appear before Jesus one day, and he's going to say, depart from me, I never knew you, you worker of Torahlessness in the Greek, without law. You are not Torah, pro-Torah, whereas, the other guys are going circumcise, a dietary law, et cetera, et cetera. Paul's arguing against it in his own letters. If that were the case, because you're not a typical Christian, what would that do to you in your thinking about the New Testament Gospels and Paul's letters and early Christianity? Who would you trust? You see what I'm saying? Would you still go with Paul on this, or would you say, maybe they're both kind of right? They're all touching the elephant. The elephant's Jesus, but they're kind of arguing over nonsensical things. I mean, how would you approach this kind of topic?
Yeah, I mean, if it turned out that way, I might just become more of a mystic Christian, maybe some sort of theist of some sort, move more in that sort of direction, if that was proven. Right. But I mean, I have a hard time seeing that because I'm pretty sure, I think it's Matthew 15. Isn't that where he takes Mark's own words about what defiles a man comes out of his mouth, what he eats, sort of challenging the Pharisees' idea of understanding of food laws and whatnot? So I'm not sure if that's entirely what the Gospel of Matthew is doing. I do agree with you. It's definitely more written for like a Jewish audience. Right. That's what the genealogies are written with, those numerical usage that only the Jews are going to understand. He's reworking Old Testament to make them Jesus fulfilling certain scriptures and whatnot that, you know, Mark's audience wouldn't care less or doesn't really care about. So I feel like if that happened, if you could sort of prove that and prove that I was wrong, I would just either have to become some more mystic, maybe a more general theist. I mean, I don't know. I'd have to rethink my entire worldview, but I mean, that would take a lot more study and reading right. to figure out where I'm going to be at. It's hard to really say from, you know, just a mere hypothetical. One thing I will say is I took a bunch of classes on virtue ethics, and I know you're not a philosophy guy, but right. virtue ethicists are very much anti-hypotheticals. Don't give me hypotheticals because they don't ever relate to the real world. Yeah.
So let me put it this way. I guess the reason I said hypotheticals, because based on my research in this, and of course you can look at all sides. I always like to explore various views and test it out. And look, and you might say, well, you're coming with your biases. And I'd say vice versa. Same thing. We all come in with this bias. I say hypothetical for you, because to me, that makes the most sense, that there's two versions floating around. Even Paul's arguing against other Christ followers that are trying to circumcise. He confronts Peter. Mm-hmm. Peter's very like, these are very apparent things to me that are like dilemmas. To me, it's like detrimental. Like, how can you trust even the words of Paul or the disciples when they can't even figure out what is?
It's right in Acts 15 as well. I mean, Acts 15 is the big debate about, you know, what should we do with Gentile Christians? I mean, right. They fully acknowledge this. They're not hiding from it.
I think they're not harmonizing, though. I think Acts is trying to connect Paul.
It's possible, but I mean, I don't think they're trying to hide it. I think they're fully, really ready to embrace it. And the argument is like, you know, they made up teachings of Jesus to want to deal with disputes, but they never made up a teaching of Jesus to deal with this very big dispute they're willing to talk about in Paul's letters and in Acts 15. So, I mean, I think it attests to their ability to not shy away from these things, embrace them fully, and not try to hide it and say, well, this is settled because Jesus said X, Y, and Z back then, so therefore all these people are wrong. They're willing to have these debates and write these letters and mention that there was this big dispute in Jerusalem about in Acts 15. So I think that speaks more to their ability not to hide away from these types of things.
Yeah. I guess we have two takes on that. You know what I mean? This is, I kind of wanted people to see on this episode why I think the way I do and why you think the way you do. You know, for me, looking at this ancient text isn't enough evidence going into the faith idea that you need evidence, some evidence to confirm why you're going to believe or trust this God that's written in this book, or that this guy rose from the dead. And I know you get this all the time, but what evidence to you is sufficient that Jesus rose from the dead? And I woke up this morning, before you answer this, I have to say, I thought about you this morning, man. I really do. Like, no matter where you stand, I love you as an individual. I really care about you. Like, I want to show that people who don't believe can talk to people who believe and have these interfaith dialogues. Like, it's important we have these. But I thought about you this morning and I said, I couldn't see in my head, even though I could use the text and say that these guys believed and some of them may have died, whatever it might be. But to me, I feel like your experience, and I'm totally psychoanalyzing right now on purpose, saying, because I experienced things. I feel like that's what's giving you real confidence, is that somehow you have a trust in some subjective relationship with the divine or something like that gives you good confidence. If not, why would these texts be sufficient to say a guy actually rose from the dead? If any other book were to say stuff like that, like, you wouldn't probably say, yeah, that happened. You know what I mean?
Well, I think we need to go into a little philosophy just by necessity. I know you said you're not kind of that guy, but let me just mention a paper that I've been trying to get more traction for, written by, I think, 2 atheists, actually. It's called The Cognitive Appeal of the Cosmological Argument. And it's an interesting paper because they talk more about the psychology of theists and atheists. Theists seem to be more willing to look at evidence for something like a cosmological argument and go, I think this is sufficient.
Right.
Atheists tend to have more of a mentality that that's not enough. So I'm more willing to just say, I don't know for right now until I get more evidence. So I think there is a different perspective between you and me there. I think there is enough evidence to make an inference, and you say there's not enough right now. I would need more. So I think there is that sort of difference there in our psychology, I guess you could say. Now, for me, I've never experienced Jesus. I don't even know what that is. I'm very much like, I've been in a Pentecostal church, and I'm like, I got to get out of here.
Wow.
Kind of like, I'm not, that doesn't do it for me. I'm a very emotional guy. I'm very analytical. I'm just not, I'm just like, okay, like, I don't understand a lot of charismatic Christians who like get very emotional. I'm like, okay, good for you. I'm going to go read a book. That's just not me. For me, it's a combination of, like, as I've told people, I'm a classical apologist. So I'm not going to argue for Christianity unless I can already argue for theism. So I'm explaining my own mentality. I've never been an atheist person. I was a deist for a little bit of time. So I've never really, so the evidence for at least base theism was enough to convince me. So moral contingency, these types of things. And then obviously if there is a God, and then it's like, well, does this God care about us? Is there enough evidence for the next step? Is there a religion true? So it's a cumulative case from different aspects. I don't even argue for the resurrection on my view, unless I can at least argue the New Testament is reliable. If I'm not a minimal facts guy. I don't agree with the whole approach that you can just argue for the resurrection from just like Paul's experience and the fact that Jesus was crucified. I think you need more evidence. You need to take a bigger picture kind of thing. So I got to start with the evidence for theism, then I got to start with reliability in the New Testament, evidence Jesus was buried in a tomb, and then of course evidence Jesus was resurrected. And that takes numerous steps to get there. That's not something you just do in like an elevator pitch.
Okay, we won't have time to go through the entire process here. Maybe we'll have future shows where we can have the discussion and stuff where you can actually like make a cumulative case. I'd be interested in hearing it, or have discussions between you and other scholars that I have on, because I'm bringing the heat when it comes to scholarship. Even if you disagree with them, I'm bringing constant scholars on the show, and I'd love to have you have debates on this channel with other people. Real quick, crash the party. Sorry. Go check out Nate's YouTube channel. Please subscribe to him. We got an online community of people that want to think about these things, have these questions. So this is a question for Derek. I know that there's a lot that goes into your shows, and every guest is different. How do you determine which guest that you will style your hair for?
Did you dress up for me? I'm not a cheap date. Okay.
Listen, I put the plaid on for you, baby. You know what I'm saying? I almost parted my hair here and then was going to talk about the Exodus, and we were going to have a conversation.
Perfect.
Right.
Well, if it's the book of Jasher Exodus, you got to part it 15 times because.
Well, I was thinking of Samson. I was going to do 7 locks, but we were thinking, I just didn't know where to go with this. So I said, let's just you can interpret it vaguely. Like there's 7 locks here. There's 15. Anyway, thank you for the super chat. I appreciate that, Nate. So I guess it sucks me starting at the end, because you do need to build your cumulative case. But I've heard your debates on this topic, and I get, if theism's true, then your natural step is to try and say which God or what narrative best fits the data. What is it for you personally, though? And I'm asking you to somewhat divorce the previous stuff in the Jesus narrative in this text. What makes that true that he rose from the dead? And do you believe that, the actual parting of the sea, or was that just natural phenomena that they attributed to divine? Do you believe that Jonah swallowed, or the fish swallowed Jonah and went to the
Jonah swallowed the fish?
Where do you draw? Yeah, I actually.
Yeah.
There's a reason I said it backwards. The other day I said, as an evangelical, I was recording myself driving, and I said, if the Bible said Jonah swallowed a fish, I would believe it. I said that 8 years ago. I'm not kidding. Somewhere like that. But
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, like, again, it's hard to really nail down one specific thing, because it's like I could say one specific thing and then someone's going to attack that.
I'm not trying to attack it, man. I just
I know. I get
things.
I get video replies where I'm always like, oh boy, here we go. Like that's nice representation there. So like
Christians, be easy on him, okay?
yeah, I get on my I got an answers in Genesis reply recently, which was fun. So it's a combination of multiple things. It's like, obviously, I don't think just Paul's experience alone would prove the resurrection. I think there's sufficient evidence for the empty tomb, but I also think we need to debate if Jesus was even buried in a tomb. This is one of the reasons I have sort of now taken the approach that if I'm going to debate an atheist on the resurrection, I first want to debate if Jesus was buried in a tomb, because a lot of atheists don't even think that. So I would like to have that debate first. So when people have approached me for resurrection debate, I'm like, let's debate if Jesus was buried in a tomb first. Natural thing that happened. Let's see if the evidence can at least support that.
I believe that he was buried in a tomb. So take me through where's that step where you go, this is where my confidence lies for that. You know what I mean? Because I'm open-minded to there actually having been a tomb he was placed in temporarily, especially Passover's coming, all the stuff. So take me through it if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'm trying to think how I can summarize this as best as possible. But it's a collection of multiple things that would happen after that. I think there's sufficient evidence to suggest the tomb was found empty, discovered by women, that the disciples were emboldened to the point where they could proclaim it right in Jerusalem, where their enemies were, where they were most likely to be persecuted at first, where they most likely could have been proven wrong. I do think there is some evidence for persecution. Obviously, I don't agree that there's enough evidence to support the persecution and martyrdom of every disciple, but there is enough to suggest some of that, especially when it comes to Peter, Paul, James, the brother of Jesus, whatnot. So it's a collection of all that sort of stuff building up. And then, of course, it's reading people like Gerd Ludemann, reading people like Bart Ehrman, Geza, what is it? Oh, crap, I forget his name. I think it's Geza something, but reading alternative hypotheses. How would I explain this from a naturalistic perspective? And at that point, does it have explanatory scope? Does it have explanatory power? Is it going to be the least ad hoc? Is it going to be the most plausible? One thing I'm most against is Bart Ehrman's line that a miracle is the least probable explanation. And I reject that because that's assuming the worldview you want. If you come to the idea that the miracle is always going to be the least probable, with that presupposition, no matter what case, no matter what evidence you look at, you're always going to come away, well, a miracle is going to be the least probable. Therefore, if I can come up with any naturalistic explanation, that's going to be more probable. And that's, in a way, sort of assuming the naturalistic worldview. You're not being fair with the evidence to maybe a non-naturalistic worldview. So I reject that outright. I'm not going to say from the get-go that a miracle is going to be the least probable. I'm going to say a miracle could be possible, but let's see if the evidence can support a miracle by being the least ad hoc and the most plausible. So I guess my two biggest criteria are least ad hoc, most plausible.
Does the connection maybe in this where you're thinking is, do you find that the testimony of them saying, look, we experienced or we saw the risen Lord, is that sufficient evidence? Ultimately, that's what it's ultimately hinging on. The idea that there's a tomb that was empty. Now he appears to them and they think that they experienced him in some sense. Is that sufficient evidence? And the fact that they went to their deaths for it, that alone right there, that's like the hinge. Even though it's not all of them, like Candida Moss wrote The Myth of Persecution, she has a really good, interesting aspect on this, showing that, a lot of this is legend. We know the church has done this for ages. Come look at the ankle bone of Paul, it's this is what goes on. And I don't want that to rub or poison the well on your position here, because that's not
I understand.
sufficient.
Yeah.
That I fully trust.
I fully acknowledge that some of the martyrdom might be legend that is built up over time. I'm not going to say that, yeah, we can totally prove that Thomas died in India by the spear being chugged through him kind of thing. I understand that. So no, it's not. I'm going on the evidence that we would see in the New Testament and what they sort of present. So are they going to present things that would work against them? Are they going to present things that they don't want to admit, this type of thing? And then again, it's just sort of building up from there. I'm not going to rely on church tradition. I relied on the New Testament when I argued for the resurrection and the evidence presented there. So again, it's building up on those kind of things. And of course, before I did that, I had to argue for reliability of the New Testament. That was also important for me, especially in my worldview, to have that before I can even argue for the resurrection.
We got a super chat, man. 2 questions. Thank you, Jeffrey, for the super chat. I appreciate it so much. Keeps the lights on. 2 questions for Michael. What is the definition of worship, and how do you approach worship as a Christian? That's a good question. I'd like to say, though, the way that I worshipped as a when I was evangelical, non-denominational. You more are analytical, you said. And for me, it was like the music's on, the emotions are rolling. You know, speaking in tongues back in the day. I was like into that prior becoming Calvinist. So go ahead and mock
Yeah.
me while you tell us your.
No, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, eventually the emotional high wears off. I mean, Jeremiah 17:9 says the heart is wicked and deceitful. Who can understand it? If all of our faith was just sort of built on emotions, I mean, like,
But
emotions
you know
change
that
all
he's
the
talking
time.
about his actual heart, and that's the mind in the ancient world.
It is, yeah. That's where the seat of the emotions is. Yeah. I mean, you know,
Do you still
that's
think
the
that's the spot where that's taking place, or do you think that's happening up here?
No, okay, I'm an idealist, so I don't think it's actually happening here. I say it was a reflection of it
That's right.
happening. It's like the representation of it happening.
You already
It's a little
lost
bit more
me,
complicated.
Nicholas. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. I was told I can't mention quantum physics, so I can't do that.
Oh gosh, no, but I'm so
So-
sorry about the questions.
No,
Definition of
let
worship.
me definition of worship. It's I'm trying to think of the best way I can say it without misrepresenting it in some way, because it's complicated. I mean, worship, I would say, is living a life pleasing to God, living a life worthy to God, living a life where you praise God. Worship can be singing, it can be extending a helping hand, offering charity, creating something beautiful for God, artwork, whatever not. It's multiple ways. There's multiple ways to worship God. It's using your whole heart, soul, mind, and body to love God in multiple ways, using your talents and whatnot. Worship is not necessarily just sitting in a pew and singing, although that can be an aspect of it. I would say worship goes far beyond that.
Okay, and then he's how do you approach it? Like, how do you personally, in those very things you were discussing, helping people, trying to do a kind deed, like true religion in a sense is kind of worship, would you say, like
Yeah.
James describes?
I would say that. Again, I'm not a charismatic person. Maybe sometimes I feel guilty that I'm not, like, in that sense, but I just don't feel like that's what, the way I am. And I don't think I have to be something I'm not to worship God. There are many ways to worship God, and I don't think God would want me to try to be someone I'm not to sort of impress him, because that's not what Christianity has ever been about.
Okay, divine hiddenness. You've brought it up a couple times. Why, to me, would God hide? He wants everyone to come to the truth. And I've heard you kind of make mention of this in one of your videos about, it would be non-authentic. It's almost like coercing, so to speak, if he has to do this, in a sense. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. I'm saying, why does he have to hide? Like, you keep mentioning God, right? And me, I understand. My mother wants me to pray. I literally say a prayer every time she's like, Derek, I'm worried that you're going to go to hell. She came from a Pentecostal background. My dad was a Catholic. So I say a prayer in front of my mom. It's really because I respect and love my mother. And I do that because that's just who I am. You mention God, you quote the verses the same way I used to, and I respect it. And I sit back and I listen. But in my head, I'm thinking, what is God and how do you know that, right? So this gets into philosophy and the mind and all that, and I don't want to go there. But the question I have is, why doesn't God reveal himself? He did to all these people, countless narratives and stories, Thomas, you name it. You can't do that to us? I don't understand. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I did a long video on divine hiddenness where I cover this a little bit more. But C.S. Lewis has a great book called Until We Have Faces. And basically what he's sort of doing from a literary perspective, he's taking one of those old myths from Greek mythology, the myth of Cupid, has like a wife and the wife can never look upon his face, and he reworks it in a new way. And basically he's arguing it's that we don't see God because we don't have faces right now. And so his understanding basically is that we have not morally progressed, or we've not been sanctified to the point where we could even see God for who he truly is. If we would see him now, we would see him in the wrong light. We'd see him in the wrong way. I mean, a lot of these people that God revealed himself to didn't really get down and worship him, so to say. I mean, Balaam, for example, in Numbers 22, was like, okay, yeah, I see God, whatever. I'll do your work, and then I'm going to go back to my old thing. Who cares? It wasn't really like a big thing. I mean, so the argument is that I lay on this video is that, would that really be all that we need? So like if Zeus existed and Zeus appeared before us right now, I'd be like, okay, cool, Zeus exists. Am I going to follow him? Am I going to dedicate my life to him? No, he's a horn dog. I'm going to avoid him. I don't have any respect for him. I don't see him worthy as worship.
I'll be honest. If Zeus appeared to me and said, look, man, I'm here. Look, they've been BSing you this whole time. I'm the guy. I'm just being honest. I'd be like, at least someone showed up. Like, thank you. All right, let's talk. Tell me what I need to know, and then go from there. That's just me, but
So then what would you do next, though?
I'd want to first listen and learn what he has to say and find out what he actually says and say, hey, those stories about you raping women, is that true? You know, like
What if
I
he
would
said
ask
yes?
questions and want to know. If he said yes, I'd say, well, this is a fucked up world we live in and you suck, you know, like I'm just saying, like, I'm not talking about you particular, your faith. I'm saying if that was the God, right? If Zeus was it and there's a pantheon of Olympian deities in the sky, somewhere out there or another planet, however you want to put it, I would be like, dude, if God's a rapist, you know, that would, I'm only speaking of the Greco-Roman world. So the Christians watching, please don't take, goodness gracious. You know what I mean? I'm just saying like that. But what, you wouldn't be shocked if you saw Zeus actually appear to you and say, hey, I'm here. You know, those are all
Well, of
false.
course I'd be shocked, but I wouldn't have what Paul Moser says is cognitively robust theism. I would have basic theism. I believe he's there, but I mean, even the demons believe and they tremble. I mean, who cares? They are fully aware of him and it doesn't do anything for them. God is trying to do something a little different here. He's trying to get people to love him for who he truly is, not because he's this powerful creator who can show up and make people do what he wants. He wants people to love him the way people love Christ. This pauper from Galilee who's sort of walking around in all the religious leaders hate him and they kill him. Honestly, I feel like if Jesus came back today, we'd probably kill him again. We're just not ready for him and who he truly is. And I've
heard that, actually. I don't want to bring up Ravi Zacharias, but he's said that quite a few times.
Well,
yeah,
let's not go down that road.
Yeah, and I was a big fan of him years ago. I have tons of his discs, but I do want to say something that you actually just pissed off every Calvinist in the world when you said he doesn't want to make people believe. At the same time, though, it's like, do you think he made Thomas believe? It doesn't sound like he forced Thomas. It just sounded like he appeared to him and it was sufficient for Thomas to go, my Lord and my God, I was wrong. I felt I know it's you. Thank you for, showing up. And it gave him enough. But I honestly, personally, I read this as an author. The author, I think, is using this as a tool to keep members to have faith, to say, blessed are those who don't see. Meaning you who are reading this book, make sure you believe in it. Believe in this faith that we have. And that's just it makes more sense to me that this is a polemic to get people to believe.
I think it's being more written in the honor shame culture of that world. Jesus is showing up and he's actually shaming Thomas. He's not honoring him with his appearance to show him how great he is. I mean, we're very tempted often to read the Bible in a lot of ways where it's like our own cultural background, where we're thinking in terms of like self-esteem and like personal guilt. That's just not the way they thought back then. I mean, there's a great book called Misreading Scripture with Western Eyes I always recommend to people just to get an introduction to a lot of these concepts. And a lot of what's sort of happening there is in the ancient world is honor and shame. Thomas is being shamed by Jesus for his rejection of the evidence that the disciples have already presented him. It's not so much giving into him in that sort of sense. It's saying that you were so foolish not to accept the evidence that's already there.
They gave was their testimony. That was the only thing they did was say. And I would be shamed right now. If he showed up, I would be shamed because the words alone don't work for me anymore like they used to. You know what I mean? And I'm sure you understand why. You would disagree with me probably in terms of the cumulative case that you have. The testimony itself isn't sufficient. Being one who was, in that paradigm, if that makes sense.
Again, it's hard for me to really say anything beyond that. It's like Jesus says in Matthew 10, if they reject, dust off your feet and move to the next town. If it's not sufficient, there's nothing I can do.
Right.
I can't go beyond that. I mean, so
I'm glad that you don't try to shove it down people's throats either. That's another thing. That's why I'm glad that you came on the show. There's some people who, like in my comment section, they literally copy and paste, and they're like, you're going to find out one day. Huh?
It's not helpful.
No. My friend Eric down in Peru, thank you for the super chat. Hi, bro. And Mark 5:7 says, Jesus was the son of the Most High Elyon. Does your guest consider Jesus was Yahweh? Regards from Lima, Peru. Nice hairstyle. Everyone with my hair. Thank you so much for the super chat, my friend. Is Jesus Yahweh? Do you take the Margaret Barker approach that, Jesus was Yahweh and El Elyon is his father?
I did a video probably about a year and a half ago, leading up to that video on monotheism you mentioned. Like, is there polytheism in the Bible? And so I argue that it's a little bit more complicated, and they're arguing from scholars like Mark Smith, who is a little bit more liberal, actually. That no, I do think that Jesus is Yahweh. I don't think there is a distinction, but I did actually believe there was a distinction in the Old Testament for a while. I did actually read for a couple months, reading Deuteronomy 32. I thought there might be a distinction between Yahweh and Elyon. It's not El Elyon in Deuteronomy 32. So the actual verses, the passage, I'm just going to paraphrase it, so I don't have to look it up right now. It's in Deuteronomy 32. It's a very old text. It's probably one of the older ones, actually, older than like Deuteronomy 4, for example, where it says, when the Most High, he divided up the nations according to the numbers of the sons of God, and Yahweh's portion is Jacob. So there's two ways to read that. One is that there's a guy, Elyon, the Most High, just means Most High, divided up the nations, and he gave Yahweh a portion. Or the way the Hebrew grammar sort of implies, and I talk about it in that video, quoting some liberal scholars who admit this, is that the Most High divided up the nations, but he, Yahweh, is keeping Jacob a portion for himself. And ultimately, I thought maybe it was the distinction that was going on there. And I was drawing a little bit too much from New Testament theology, because it doesn't ever say, Elyon is just a title meaning Most High. It doesn't mean that's the creator God. It doesn't mean there's a higher God. Baal is called Most High. Adonis is called Most High. It's just sort of like whoever is currently ruling at that point is the Most High. So you can sort of have this concept like that maybe Satan, the devil, I guess you could say, sort of became the Most High, and that's why he's able to offer Jesus in the Gospels all the nations of the world if you just bow to him, because he had already controlled them, and at that point Yahweh only had Jacob. I eventually rejected it because the more scholars I read on it, the Hebrew grammar is not really trying to imply polytheism. It's sort of trying to teach that Yahweh actually is the Most High, and he's keeping this special portion for himself, kind of thing. And I don't want to read, and I thought I was just reading too much New Testament theology into that, and I don't think that's really what the Hebrew authors are doing. So off on a rabbit trail, but bringing it all the way back, I do think Jesus is Yahweh. I would say I agree with Michael Heiser in his dissertation that he is sort of like this extension of Yahweh, this sort of memra, or this angel, this messenger of Yahweh that sort of acts as sort of like the agent of Yahweh, but is also Yahweh himself in that sense.
Kind of a lesser Yahweh, but it's still Yahweh nonetheless.
Yeah, it's so like Michael Heiser draws a comparison to Eucritic cycles where you have El and Baal. El is sort of like the God who's sort of the head, and Baal is sort of the one going around doing all his work. But for the monolatrists of Israel, they couldn't have that. So it's just Yahweh sending out Yahweh himself to do certain things.
Interesting. Real quick, you brought up Deuteronomy 32. I got a good buddy, Stephen Nelson. Thank you for making these little things. So I brought this up on an interview I did with Dr. Heiser a while back, and I've got a super chat I've got to get to here in a moment. So I don't want to forget about you, Mr. Morpheus. So I hope you bear with me, my friend. In Deuteronomy 32, we have a textual variant, and it's actually extremely important textual variant. I wanted to show you this here real quick so you can see the Masoretic on the left, and then you see this is obviously the Qumran scroll that we find of this, and then the LXX, of course. And so you talk about late Masoretic text in some of your videos. Let me share the other one real quick so you could see this. Okay, where is it at? Right here, variants in the Song of Moses. So I'll let you guys peek at this, and then what I'd like to say is so I asked Dr. Heiser about a textual variant in the Song of Moses, Deuteronomy 32:43. If the Masoretic text is late, isn't the MT only paradigm false? That's the assumption that the Masoretic text is almost always superior to other text types. Modern Bibles are substantially based on the MT, and it literally like removes this particular part, and the context is radically different in this. It's not just sons of Israel. We're talking sons of God, the Elohim, the divine divinities and such. So the question then comes down to, wouldn't you say that would make it inferior? The MT is an inferior text in particular for excluding this. And what else hasn't made it down? Like, what are we missing? We could be missing a bunch of stuff.
Right. It's entirely possible. I mean, the more interesting textual variant is Genesis 14, where they insert Yahweh into that. So that's always a very interesting one to talk about. But no, I don't think we can just say the Masoretic is inferior and the Septuagint is superior. It's just there are places we got to approach this as much as we possibly can even though we're not scholars, from a scholarly perspective, and just say, look, there are going to be some times where the Masoretic has very good information we should study. There's going to be times when the Septuagint has good information we should study.
Right.
Let's not just say there's a priority or one or the other. I want to study the text. Let's study the Dead Sea Scrolls that have not been shown to be forgeries. And let's try to our best to understand what the authors are doing with this. What's the theology they're trying to get across? What are they trying to teach us through there? So I'm very cautious of saying one text is better than the other. I mean, like, Jeremiah in the Septuagint is 1/7 shorter and it's arranged slightly different from the Masoretic. The likely explanation is when Jeremiah was taken to Babylon, they reorganized it, added a little additional commentary to sort of help explain what's sort of going on there. But I don't think that commentary should be rejected. I think there's some interesting stuff going on there that we should study.
If that's happening though, like how, I guess the question boils down to, Mr. Morpheus, I'm gonna get your super chat and some other super chats here. How reliable should we say do you use the word inerrant? Do you use the word infallible?
I hate that word.
Are you extremely flexible on this being somewhat human? Like what I mean is, what I'm talking about. Evangelical fundamentalist Christians, this is magical, man.
This is how I explain it to people. Okay, so let's just say the Bible's the Word of God. Okay, just
what does that mean?
How I explain this to Christians? So did God use Moses to bring Israel out of Egypt? Yeah. Did he do it perfectly? Did he make mistakes along the way? Yeah. Okay, but God can still use imperfect people to do his will, to write down his word. That doesn't mean that it necessarily has to be absolutely perfect in every way possible. But the important thing to the ancient audience wasn't so much that every single word was perfect. It was about getting the message across. These are oral cultures. They're not focused on like making sure that we have every thing absolutely perfect. There were many variety ways to say the same thing. They were trying to preserve a very important message to hand down.
Now you're
how they did that could vary.
Back before it becomes orthodox, so to speak. You're talking like in antiquity.
I mean, what does that even mean? I mean, a lot of these concepts.
I guess what I'm saying is a lot of the Jewish people, like if you get one jot or tittle mistaken, they have traditions where they would like remove that and start a new scroll. They saw this so important.
That's late Masoretic Bible or scripture copying techniques. Yeah, it's hard to really apply that to the early church,
right?
Jews before that time period. I mean, even though Ken Hovind will do that, I love that when he did that.
Anachronistically, they apply it, and I get it. Okay, shifting gears, Mr. Morpheus, thank you so much for the super chat. Why is it rational to accept something of which there is no evidence? He's undetectable by the laws of physics he created. Okay,
well, I would say it is irrational to accept something with no evidence. I would say that it's just wrong to say there is no evidence for a theistic worldview. And just like it's wrong to say there's no evidence for a naturalistic worldview. There's evidence for all types of worldviews. The question is, what is the most sufficient worldview to explain the data? What's going to be the most parsimonious? It's going to be the most plausible. I just reject that whole notion, the idea that there's no evidence for any worldview out there. Of course there's evidence. The question is, how good is it?
And how you're interpreting it and why it makes sense to you. Thank you, Mr. Morpheus. I appreciate the super chat, my friend. And he's over at the Dagger Squad. For those who don't know, he's constantly dealing with the Hebrew Israelite movements in America.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. Moose Lee, thank you for the super chat. Are spiritual gifts real? Could you tell us of your experience of speaking in tongues? That must be a jab at me. So
I've never done it, so that's on you.
Asking the atheist with the theist on the channel.
Not going to do it. No.
So what are your thoughts on the gifts before I give my own little insight?
I mean, there's a lot of stuff on that I just haven't read. I think the gift of tongues is something that you should actually be able to understand it in another language. If it's actually going to be the real gift of tongues. So Lutheran Satire has got a very funny video on this where C-3PO shows up in a Pentecostal meeting and he's like, I can speak all these languages. And he's like, great, we need an interpreter of the tongues. And he's like, nope, that's just gibberish. Nope, that's just gibberish. That's Mexican or that's Spanish sounding gibberish. That's French sounding gibberish. Like,
right.
It's like, so no, I would say you got to be able to understand it in a different language.
Do you think the gifts are still happening today? The gift of prophecy, the gift of laying on of hands, the gift of healing, the gift, or not the gift of healing, but the healings are people are actually, they're filled with the Holy Spirit and they're able to perform these deeds.
Yes, but A, it's very rare, and B, if it's actually happening, you should be humbled by it, not ready to go and boast how wonderful you are and get the news channel out there to explain how great it is and how God chose you for this. I think when that happens, I'm very skeptical of it, because you should be humbled by the Spirit using you, not so much ready to use it to make your name great. And that's what I see a lot of people do. With a lot of the public, the stuff we hear about, that's the stuff that always seems to get out because people want to use that in the improper way. And if you've truly been touched by God, that kind of stuff, you would not be doing that prideful response.
So my response to this question for me was the spiritual gifts I thought were real for me. It was a church that spoke in tongues. We were reading from Acts and we were reading from Paul about speaking in tongues and gifts and how this is a real thing. I believed in Jesus, so I was supposed to follow what the church did, and I was supposed to receive these gifts, and they laid hands on me and they were all speaking in like a bunch of them. And they're like, the utterance should flow, right? And I'm like, okay. And I started practicing, and it's like you've got the group thing priming you to finally start doing it. And then when I did it, and I was all excited, kind of pat on the back, you get the warm and fuzzy, probably getting dopamine and serotonin released. And I'm extremely ecstatic. And I'm like, I feel God. And that same thing I felt when I was born again. When I went down to the altar and I asked God into my heart, I felt warm. I felt secure. I felt comforted from a father figure that I didn't have on earth in the same way, because I had an alcoholic father. Needless to say, I'm now sufficient and I don't believe in a God, and I feel like complete from this. But the experience was, I think, primed. And I really believed I'd have these gibberish moments in the car where it was supposed to build up faith. Paul said, I speak in tongues more than all of you. So I'm over here doing this in my car and to music and at church, and they're laying on them hands. I'm wondering, do I have the gift of prophecy? All of these things. And I rationalized my way out of it by saying, well, that was a temporary gift in the early church to get things started. That which is perfect has come, not the second coming of Jesus. I made it, you interpret it in a different way. So that way the gift of tongues had ceased. I made all these excuses in the church as to why I started getting away from the gift. But now I think it's like any other religion that claims to have these type of abilities and such. It's like, for me, I'm very cautious. I'm like Dan Brown. I want to approach these things and see skeptically. Really, is this true, or is this subjective, perceptionally true, group consciously true, not that it's actually real? And I think a lot of religious stuff comes to that, in my opinion. But
I mean, there's nothing I disagree with there. I don't think a lot of that is, I think people really want to have a religious experience to the point where they manufacture it because they want to feel special. They want to feel like they're like the apostles or some way. And it's like, you don't need to be that. Why are you trying to make this about you? That if you're trying to make it about you, you've missed the entire point of the gospel.
Why don't they take up the cross and go all the way to martyrdom, and then they're like the apostles? I'm being silly. I do not encourage anyone. Please do not do this at home. Cryptician, thank you for the super chat. There's no more evidence and rationality for Christian God than there is any other God or fictional character claimed to be real by their idolizers. That was a jab, man. It's a jab at you.
Okay.
That's not a question. That was a comment. But would you want to make a comment back about that? Would you say that you believe there is more rational belief for your God than any other?
Yes. Nothing else really to say to that. It's just a jab. Okay. Thanks.
Well, thank you for the super chat. I mean, look, he has, I actually share that opinion, but I also, I'm not like attacking, I don't agree that there is a God. Could there be? Sure. But that's one of the issues I had when I was deconverting, was looking at other world religions and trying to say, okay, my daddy may not be the daddy who could beat up all daddies. That was the way I kind of approached it.
Interesting way to approach it. All right.
But dude, my dad's a badass. So that's hard to swallow for me. He's a Green Beret Special Forces retired dude. So he's a close quarter combat trainer, etc.
I could take him. I got a rape whistle. I could take him.
Mr. Morpheus, thank you again, man. God could reveal himself in such a way there would be no doubt, yet he refuses to. So why is it people's fault that they're not convinced?
I mean, yeah, there could be no doubt that he exists. I mean, even the demons know that. They believe, and they don't care. It's not so much God revealing himself to just prove, here I am, now you can go to heaven. That's misunderstanding what heaven is. It's misunderstanding what hell is. It's misunderstanding what God is trying to do through the Gospels. That's the best I can give in an elevator pitch. But if you see my video on Does God Send People to Hell, my video on Divine Hiddenness, my video on Heaven, I elaborate a little bit more in what is sort of going on in this sort of what God is trying to do through these types of things.
Thank you for the super chat. I appreciate it. Look, I came in with loaded questions. I got one more for you. And you bring up the Exodus. You said you wanted to talk a little bit about Handel. So Dr. Handel, who I had on talking about
oh yeah, he's a great guy.
Real quick question for IP: your thoughts on the Shroud of Turin? Will you make a video about it?
Oh my gosh, I have not had time to study that at all, and I want to be fair when I study it, and I don't. And so I'm just like that. It's one of those things. Like, it's not necessary for me. It would be like the icing on the cake if it was real. But like, there's just so many more interesting things I want to get to. Like, I want to do a series on the documentary hypothesis. I want to do more stuff on Joshua. I want to go through the Old Testament. There's stuff I want to get back to with arguments for God's existence. So I've not had a day where I can sit down and even read a paper on that. So no opinion right now.
Okay, no opinion. We will be looking forward one day to something you put out about it, though.
Yeah, maybe in 2040.
Awesome. So
coming soon.
Yeah, coming soon. All right. We didn't get into the whole prophecy thing on second coming and stuff, and I was a full preterist at the end. I'm sure you know about that. Would you like to comment about Dr. Handel's Exodus? We get more super chats. I'll get your super chats when.
I mean, I don't know if we have time to do it. I mean, there's just a lot I would disagree with him in that talk.
You are more in line with Dr. Falk, right?
Now, yeah, he's convinced me to take his position, and so
okay.
I've changed to his position. And so, yeah, I understand where Handel's coming from. One of my things I try to extend an olive branch to atheists or skeptics on this. It's like, look, when we argue for the Exodus from the archaeology, we're not trying to say this proves Yahweh parted the Red Sea and proves that he actually sent plagues upon Egypt. What we're trying to show is that we have an account. It's the book of the Exodus. It says they say their ancestors came out of Egypt. They were a mixed multitude for a while, and then they settled in Canaan. We don't have a textual account that says there was a bunch of Canaanites living in Canaan after the Egyptian empire collapsed. They just moved up into the hills and started Israel. If we had a textual account to support that account, then it would be on equal footing. But why can't we just argue for like a naturalistic? Why can't you have a naturalistic worldview when it comes to the Exodus? There was just a bunch of Semites living in Avaris with the mixed multitude as well. Some plagues or something happened. They interpreted it as divine. And then they said, some of them said, we had ancestors that lived up in Canaan. That's pretty good. Why don't we go take that area? And about a generation later, they show up. Well, we have archaeological evidence that can match that. So when people say there's no evidence for the Exodus, a lot of times I want to say, but the primary evidence we actually use, to the shock of many, is the book of Exodus. We have a textual account that actually says that. Now, when we argue for archaeology, we're not saying this somehow proves Yahweh did all these things. We're saying this can correlate with that account. We're not saying it's going to prove it. It can correlate. It can also correlate with a naturalistic understanding where there's just a bunch of Semites and some mixed multitude as well, left the area, moved up into there and resettled it. So like, why would we posit a whole account for which we don't have any textual evidence for when we already have a textual account, Israel saying that they were just this group of Semites in Egypt and they just moved up there? I don't understand. I guess maybe you can help me out with this. I just don't understand why we would just say that we're going to take an entirely different approach to the founding of Israel when there's no textual evidence for that. There's no histories that have come down. Now, maybe if there was like a stele we found that said this, then I would be okay, now you got a good point. But I just don't see any reason for rejecting just even a naturalistic understanding of like these Semites moving out of Egypt and settling in Canaan. Why do we got to say they were always in Canaan and whatnot? So I feel like it just, from my perspective, it just sort of comes across as a little like a little ad hoc.
I will admit this is out of my field of expertise, of course, because I don't have a field of expertise. But in terms of my research, like I've not probed deep into this. But I know like William Deaver and the consensus scholarship in archaeology, or archaeologists, if you will, they're all like Jericho's, that like all of that stuff didn't actually happen as depicted. So when they see a narrative constantly do things that don't really match the archaeology, so to speak, and you probably could quote scholars on your end that would disagree with these scholars, and that's fine. I'm just saying the consensus on these archaeologists. Well, even let me just stop you there. Even like you don't even have to say like they literally did everything that Joshua said. It's just that there was these people in Egypt and they moved up to Canaan.
That's all I'm trying to get at right now. It's just like I'm trying to take a minimalist, like a mere Exodus, C.S. Lewis says mere Christianity approach. I'm taking a mere Exodus approach here. But like, for example, what's his name? Holy Kool-Aid mentioned Jericho in his latest video and talked about the latest reports on Jericho. He didn't talk about, though, the fact that the actual latest report mentioned there was site leveling there. So it's not so much that we haven't found walls that were destroyed in the late Bronze Age. He notes in the excavation report that we can't because later builders had site leveling. They've basically damaged the late Bronze Age and the Iron Age layers to the point where we don't really know what was going on there. So it's not that the walls are missing in the layers. It's the layers are missing to even find the walls. So there's actually a little bit more complexity there than what is actually being told. I think it's... Go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
No, Israel Finkelstein. I actually emailed him. He emailed me back, and I almost got my Jesus to join me on the show there. But I'm just saying he's a serious guy. He said he's overworked right now, and he said he can't come on. But
he's very intelligent.
Yeah, maybe I can get you and Dr. Hendel to have a conversation about this. And look, expressing it the way you did is not confrontational. You're reasonable about this, Michael, and I respect that. So if you approached him like that, let's see what he has to say, because I know that Dr. Falk's professor is someone that Dr. Hendel and him, they debated in the 5 Views of Exodus book that I was looking at, and so there's a difference of opinion on the cultural position versus approaching this kind of coming from a biblical worldview. One of the things on the Exodus that, if you don't mind me mentioning, is Exodus 12:41 states the Israelites were in Egypt for 430 years. Verse 37 states that by the time the Israelites left Egypt, their population was 600,000 men plus an undisclosed number of women and children, which is actually luggage in the LXX, along with mixed multitude that journeyed with them to Mount Sinai. Egyptologists estimate the population of Egypt at the height of the New Kingdom period to be less than 4 million people. Targum Yonasan claims that there were 5 children to each Israelite man, meaning that there would have been well over 3 million total Israelites, and there's only 4 million in Egypt.
He's taken over, yeah.
Now, I know that you don't take a literal approach to these numbers. They're hyperbolic, but are they merely hyperbolic? And how do we trust an account like this? It goes back to Hebrews 11. Like, we're supposed to have faith, and here's the evidence. And I'm like, but the evidence, when we look at it, it's not great. It's not like in your face, boom, Exodus is real. Jericho's real. God actually did these things. It could be a cultural, why do we trust that? You know what I mean? Anyway, I don't want to interrupt you.
Yeah, for me, it's almost misreading scripture with Western eyes. We're assuming that when someone writes down a number in an ancient culture, it has to be literal. And then later it's sort of like, whoa, it was just meant to be hyperbolic. But I mean, that's what would happen if it was written in our culture. But in that culture, that's not what they were doing with numbers. We got to understand what they were doing with numbers in their culture and then apply that cultural understanding. We cannot just say, well, I mean, the numbers should have been literal. Why didn't they just give us the literal numbers? Well, they weren't writing to this culture. They were writing to their own culture, their own descendants who would have understood in that cultural context. And so we got to try our best to understand what they were doing when they write down numbers, when they're writing down their genealogies. What are they trying to do here? When they're writing down their history, what are they trying to do here? And so that's what we got to do. It's like if I told you I saw a car flying down the road, Derek. Now, the car and the road are literal, but flying is a metaphor. If someone in 3,000 years could come and say, well, this statement either has to be taken metaphorically, figuratively, or it's got to be taken literally. And you and I would understand, no, you can understand flying metaphorically in our culture, whereas the car and the road are literal. Well, the same way, we got to try to do that with an ancient culture. What were they trying to do with numbers? Were they trying to write down exact quantities like later commentators thought? Well, I don't think that's what they were doing in the pre-exilic period. So I think we need to try our best to understand that and not try to force our modern expectations onto them.
I respect it. I mean, for me, it's like it goes back to the preservation of God's word and how he wants to reveal this to the world. If he's active in the world, he has the power and capability of making this known and understood. It's so confusing. I mean, there's a lot of confusion. You really have to be a scholar almost to really you're practically a scholar. I'm practically a scholar in what we do all the time. I'm not saying we are. I'm saying we're practically the way we think. People look to you. They go, wow, Michael knows a lot of information. A lot of Christians follow you. They know that you're a smart guy. You're intelligent, and you study this stuff. It's like it requires a level of depth, trying understanding to make sense of this puzzle. And it's so complex in many ways to really get to the level we are. And people,
I'm going to say something that might shock you, but good.
Yeah.
Good.
All right.
I'm glad, because, in some way, it's like this. Like if my daughter's 5, if she says, Dad, can I go outside and play? I'm like, okay, well, let's see. What time is it? Is it too hot because we live in Arizona? Sure, for an hour, come back in. Now, what if my daughter in 18 years says, Dad, can I go out and play? I'm like, well, you're an adult. Like, learn to think for yourself here, honey. Like, God wants us to grow in knowledge. He doesn't want to spoon feed us everything. I think it's kind of good in some ways that this has sort of happened, so that we want to grow in knowledge. We want to learn these things. It's not just sort of spoon fed to us. So sure, you can argue it from both ways. It's weird. It's confusing. It's complex, but some ways that can be kind of good. So maybe it's not all doom and gloom. Maybe there's something more to this than just us supposed to be giving everything like it's first grade for the rest of our life.
Damn it. No, I'm just kidding. All right, so we have to address mythicism. There's a chat going on. We're not even paying attention to the chat, by the way. We're like, you and me are having fun. Toxic Babes says, IP, can you please address Jesus mythicism for people in the chat? Thanks. And I've done quite a bit of interviews on this very topic of Jesus mythicism. Even, I think I had a thumbnail with you in it at one point. It may have been you, or it may have been... it probably was you, and I did one with who's the other Christian guy that debates Muslims all the time?
Oh, David Wood, maybe.
Yes, David Wood. Yeah. But would you like to address Jesus mythicism?
Yeah, I mean, Jesus mythicism is it's the idea that Jesus never existed. He was like he was just a mythical character, and there's many variations of that. So how do I address it? Do I think there's a sufficient evidence that Jesus existed? Yeah, I think Bart Ehrman gives sufficient evidence Jesus existed just from looking in Paul's letters. I think there's sufficient evidence to suggest Jesus existed just from Tacitus alone. To be sufficient evidence to believe there was a Honi the circle drawer just from Josephus. And of course, the Talmud mentions him, but gets the wrong century by so long. So I do think there's sufficient evidence that Jesus existed. I'm not convinced, obviously, by the idea that Jesus would be this amalgamation of all these earlier pagan deities. And not all mysticists even take that. So it depends on the brand of mysticist we're talking about. If you want something, the thing I've looked at into most is probably the idea that Jesus was sort of like an amalgamation of pagan deities, or he's part of a running motif. Everyone had a dying and rising God, and Jesus was just like this Jewish Christian Greco version of one of those. And I find that very unconvincing for multiple reasons, because a lot of times we cherry pick out the similarities in some of these supposed dying and rising deities. Take Asclepius. Apparently Asclepius was a resurrected deity that healed people and did a lot of the same things Jesus did. Well, no. Only if you cherry pick certain things out. Asclepius never healed anyone during his life. He was in a prison. He saw a serpent come in, he killed it. Another serpent came in with a special herb, revived the snake, and they both went out. Asclepius then got this herb and started reviving people. Zeus killed him because they didn't want that happening. In later legends, Asclepius doesn't resurrect. He's taken up to heaven. He's exalted to heaven. And then in his temple, or at his shrines, I believe, there's these different inscriptions of saying how people come to the shrine, and he's healed certain people. And you could pick 5 or 6 out that sound similar to some of Jesus's healings. But there's a whole list of other ones there.
For you, I'm sorry I interrupted you, bro.
It's just go ahead. Yeah.
It excites me because you're so bright, man. And to me, it's that right there would make me go, hold on. Other people did these miracle type things, and even if it's not identical, I've got a really good friend who's a historicist who thinks Jesus existed. He is an atheist, right? But he's he'll go to bat for Christians on particular things over against mythicists. But he does see there are parallels even to some pre-existing Jesus figures. He doesn't take the zeitgeist. Let's not straw man the position. He doesn't go to zeitgeist and say everything's a parallel and Horus is this and that with 12 disciples, the whole nine, which I still loved that documentary years ago when I didn't really know that there was a lot of inaccuracies and things that really needed to be sourced. But to me, other people had apotheosis, risen, and were taken up, died and rose in some senses, even if it was a spiritual resurrection or whatnot. There's disputes over 1 Corinthians 15 on Jesus's resurrection or the resurrection of people. And all I'm getting at is like, does that not make you question, what if mine is something similar, even though it's not identical? There's something here that's different?
Well, no, because again, the evidence I'd use for Christianity is different from that. And I think people get a little too excited with parallels and they run a little wild from it. So like take this, we know about Zeus. He at one point turns into a swan and sleeps with Queen Leda. Mm-hmm. But did you know in Mayan mythology, one of the hero twins turns himself into a hummingbird and sleeps with a daughter of a goddess mountain? Right. I mean, well, there you got two deities turning themselves into birds and sleeping with a woman. Clearly, there's got to be some sort of connection there. Right. Or maybe it's just a coincidence. Now, we as humans, we don't like coincidences because we're like, hold on, there can't be coincidences.
I guess it's an epistemology question, because the one that turns into a bird and the one that does this, do you think those things actually happen?
No, I think those are mythology. Yeah, like that. So, no, I understand there's numerous mythological stories. Well, how could Christianity not be different? Right. Or how could Christianity be different? Well, again, I would go back to what we were talking about the resurrection earlier. I think there's a lot of sufficient evidence, especially applying the criteria like parsimony, plausibility, where the resurrection is the best explanation for that. Mm-hmm. Now, if someone else could do that same type of thing with one of these other stories, then that would create a very interesting conversation. So far, I've not seen that, though. And when I've looked at it, I don't think those can just be explained away. Or I think those can be, there's simpler explanations where you could just say there's just a naturalistic story going on here. So again, I have a hard time of generalizing. I don't think we should generalize. I'm not going to say, yes, because Mayans mythology can be debunked, that means we can debunk Greek mythology. I understand we got to judge it on its own basis and whatnot. But I still would say when I apply that criteria to all of these different ones, there's only one that really stands out.
Huh. Yeah, for me, I guess it was just the shocker of what made, how do I know that Vespasian didn't actually spit in someone's eyes in the Temple of Serapis? That I think it's Tacitus or Suetonius writes about.
Tacitus, yeah.
Yeah, and also stepped on a man's withered hand and healed them in the same, Temple of Serapis. For me, it's like, I don't believe that's true. Just like I would apply that Jesus also and any other God, I would look and go, well, what is the point and the purpose of writing these things? Is it to legendize it? Is it that there were common people running around on the streets like you see in Africa right now on camera? Look at this healing. Send me your coin. I don't know, and I'm not going to pretend to know. But that really makes me cautious when I see stuff even contemporaneous to Jesus, Apollonius of Tyana. I'm with Ehrman, and let's just say there's no parallels, but you have a similar figure right here at the end of the first century, healings, miraculous birth, the whole nine. And I go, that for me, and I know that we have a different approach, but that alone makes me go, oh man, hold on.
Well, I think you should be cautious.
Right.
Well, I think that's good to be.
Well, thank you. I think you should too.
Yeah. I think we all should be cautious. Then it just becomes a question is, why is the New Testament different? Do they have anything different? And that's where we talk about the reliability of the New Testament, the evidence they give for the resurrection and whatnot. And so, yeah, that's where it's going to boil down to. Is it just like all those other legends? And if it is, then yeah, I'm wrong. I would argue that there's a little bit something different sort of going on here. And I
agree with you on that, actually. Mm-hmm. I think there is something different going on here. I don't want to make this seem that this is completely fiction. I think there was a real guy, Paul. I'm even leaning, I really think there was most likely a guy. I'm not like certainty, you can't be certain. And I think it's foolish to act certain. But I think there was a guy. I think there was a Paul. I think these things are legit there. And there's a real movement here trying to explain how that works out and what goes on in these texts. That's where the caution really comes in for me, is I start seeing these things and go, whoa. So I'd like to bring up something interesting, but we got a super chat here. Bible bloopers, my good friend Jeff. What kind of God watches innocent children being tortured and sold as sex slaves, kept in cages, raped and abused daily, and does nothing to save them?
Okay, well, he does. And I would recommend my video on suffering, where I go into a little bit more detail. So yeah, that's a long answer, which I probably don't have time to get into, but luckily I have two videos, Problem of Evil and the Problem of Suffering, where I deal with that, probably about 2 hours. Or I think it's an hour and 40 minutes or so between both of them.
We don't have to spend a lot of time on the slavery thing. I just want to make mention, you sided with Jay Caballero, right? The guy that I had on. He's an evangelical, but he recognized the severity of the situation in the ancient world, because most apologists I've talked to, they literally want to reinterpret it's only indentured servant.
You'll like a video coming out in July called The Imperfect Mosaic Law.
Bro, you are burning in hell in so many Christian heads.
Oh, I sure am. Don't you worry. I've been there for years. I'm totally.
Oh my God.
I might look. I'm going to piss off so many people, and I don't care because honestly, I think a lot of Christians need to remember what one of the things Paul teaches. Like, who cares what the people think about you? Care about what your Father thinks about you. And I try very hard to take that to heart. So I am perfectly fine pissing off the flock if I have to. That's perfectly fine pissing off people outside of the flock. I'm just trying to do my best. But
look,
honestly, at the end of the day,
piss people off. So go subscribe to him. Seriously though, Michael, man, I'm glad we had this talk, and we're having this talk. I want to throw one more thing at you, if you don't mind, just an idea to get your thoughts on this. And you're more than welcome to ask me any question you'd want. I know this has been like a one-way street, kind of, because you came on the show. Dennis MacDonald, he's an interesting scholar. He's an erudite scholar. Dr. Dennis R. MacDonald's written books on Homeric epics and the Gospel of Mark. He's seen stuff going on. He has the Dionysian Gospel. Let's see. Yeah, right here, Luke and Virgil. He's got some really good books, right? And they're really beautiful. The Dionysian Gospel, talking about Dionysus, and the Gospel of John.
Yeah, I remember Dennis. Yeah, I do remember that now. Yeah.
He shows, like, the miracle in Cana, the turning water into wine and stuff. There is so much interesting potential mimesis. What do you say?
Oh no, keep going. I'll respond when you're done. But yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, so there's a lot of mimesis potentiality here going on between these two, like the eating of the flesh, drinking of the blood stuff, right? I will go so far as to say we don't have evidence prior to Paul, but I think Paul's the one who came into the movement with this idea of the sacrament. Whether he was changing something from Passover and making it kind of Hellenized, and he's saying, okay, we're going to consume the god. We know that Dionysus has a similar ritual in his, what is it called? Mystery religion, mystery movement. Did you see the debate I had with who's the Jesus mythicist? I was on the Capturing Christianity channel. I had a debate with crap. Let me look him up really fast. Godless Engineer?
No. This was he's written books on mythicism. I can probably
look him up. This isn't a mythicist, by the way. Dr. MacDonald is a historicist.
Oh, I know. Yeah, but we were talking about this. This was the debate was on this. The debate was, is Jesus or is Christianity a mystery religion?
Okay.
And so I had a whole debate on this, and the guy who he's written like a bunch of books on this. He's not a scholar though. Crap! How did I forget his name?
He's written books on this.
Yeah, I'm sure you've heard of him.
Are you talking about David Fitzgerald?
Dave, that's it. Yeah,
okay.
him and I had a debate about this very topic.
Yeah, he's a good friend of mine.
Yeah,
well, I'm friends with everybody, but yeah.
Yeah, I'd recommend that debate because I talk about a lot of this mystery religion stuff that allegedly pairs with Christianity in that debate.
Well, this particular book and books that he has are showing that there may be sources that isn't just the Old Testament. You and me both know textual criticism. We know that there's Hebraic mimesis from the Old Testament, utilizing to sometimes potentially even invent narratives based on Old Testament. There might be kernels of history that are going on, though the narrative itself is borrowing from the Old Testament. Well, he goes and shows it's not just the Old Testament. We have narratives that seem to be mimetically tied in with other epics. And Euripides the Bacchae, for example, in Acts, it's hard to kick against the goads, Paul quotes. This is a direct quote from Euripides the Bacchae, for example. The conversion story of Paul. Paul's on the road to, was it Damascus? Yeah. And he gets knocked off the horse, as people imagine it. It doesn't really say that, but nonetheless, he's on the ground and this white light shines up and he says, Paul, why do you, Saul, I apologize. Why do you persecute me? That same phrase is mimetically connected for 1 Kings. When David's running from Saul, same name as Paul, and he says, Saul, why do you pursue me? And in Greek, pursue and persecute are the same term. So here you have a mimesis, right? You see a connection from King David and Saul, Paul or Saul and Jesus. And Jesus is the seed of David, or Yeah, seed of David. So the question I have is, in that, he also shows that when you're looking at the narrative in the Euripides Bacchae tale, Pentheus, I think it is the one who's actually challenging Dionysus, and he doesn't believe in his divinity. He does not believe that he's divine. What happens is he goes out and sees these women acting in orgies in the woods. I'm sure you probably know this. I'm just telling our audience this. And he climbs into a tree and they catch him, and a whirlwind of fire appears, a bright light appears. This scene, it's similar to this Euripides the Bacchae, and there's like countless examples of that in his book. When you can see a book like Acts using Old Testament, building up its narrative, using other books potentially like Euripides the Bacchae to build its narrative, does that make you question at all, like, how am I viewing these stories in its sincere historical reality? Like, does that make you...
Okay, there's a couple things I want to say about this. Let me see if I can get through them all. For one, have you heard of a scholar named Glenn Bowersock?
I have not.
Okay, he wrote a book called Fiction is History, and he actually argues a lot of these mystery cults were borrowing from Christians after the Nero persecution around the 60s. And that's when he says a lot of these texts really start dating to that time. So maybe there's actually... people want to say the Christians were the ones borrowing. Maybe it's actually the other way around. Now, that's disputed. Fine, whatever. That doesn't bother me because, again, the video I did recently was, is the story of Jesus stolen from the Old Testament? Where I talk about how there's a lot of Old Testament parallels in the New Testament. And a lot of times they're taking these old works and they're reworking them. And so I detail that a lot. I mean, Paul quotes Aristotle, I think at least twice, and probably hints to him a couple more times. In Acts 17, he directly...
Epimenides. Yeah, Epimenides. In Acts
he
17.
quotes directly from them. And so, like, that doesn't bother me because it's so blatant that he's doing that. But what is he doing? He's trying to show, like, he's trying to draw parallels to sort of, like, give people a good understanding of what's sort of going on here when he's trying to do these types of things. That never really bothers me. If all of this is true, everything you're saying is true, that they were sort of, like, borrowing from these Greek legends, it's like, so what? I mean, scholars are aware of the Old Testament parallels. They've been aware of them for years.
Right.
That doesn't mean that, as I detailed in my video, is the story of Jesus stolen from the Old Testament. That doesn't mean they were making things up. Because a lot of times when events happen in today's day and age, we look for parallels of the past to sort of draw on. Tacitus does this. Virgil does this a lot. Rihanna Nash highlights a lot of this. That she says that maybe... Wait. Is Rihanna Nash... Man, I've read so much Rihanna Nash. I don't know. That's one of those names. It's like I always see their name. I just don't know. But anyway, in some of those books, he points out that, like, Seneca may have even committed suicide in a way to mimic Socrates. That certain assassins mimicked older tales of assassins when they were doing their jobs. So, like, just because something might be drawing on an older work, that doesn't mean they're making it up. It means,
right,
as humans are pattern-seeking creatures, they're saying, wait a minute, the thing I'm living through right now reminds me of this event that happened in this work from centuries ago. I should totally note the connections there. And we see that happening all the time in ancient works.
I agree with you.
So I don't see that as a problem, even if it's true. I think it's a little, I also think we got to be a little careful. I think there's a lot of parallelism that we tend to assume there's a lot of parallels there that are not. So there's a scholar named Stephen Hidgmans who wrote a paper called "The Sun That Did Not Rise in the East," and so it's been accused that Sol Invictus was originally a Syrian deity that was imported into Rome, and people were drawing on parallels of sun worship, and he just basically debunks that. He says, no, Sol Invictus was a Roman deity. It was never taken from Syria. That's absurd. And so sometimes we got to be a little too careful with trying to find parallels in everything. Now, that comes from someone who says, sure, there are parallels sometimes, but it's about moderation. Aristotle would say it's about moderation. It's not to say there's parallels literally in everything. Right. Sometimes we got to use our skeptical eye or our scholarly eye to try to find where they actually are. And sometimes we have to recognize maybe we're overthinking it. And
I agree with you. Everything you said there, like, I agree with. Do you think Jonah was swallowed by a giant fish?
Do I think Jonah was swallowed by? That's a complicated question. I say when Jonah was taken into the ocean, well, he could have. Well, my position is, first of all, he was not in the belly of a whale for 3 days and 3 nights. 3 days and 3 nights is a common motif to refer to going down to the underworld.
Agreed.
And in Jonah chapter 2, he says he goes down to Sheol. So Jonah's died. He's resuscitated by a miracle of God. So we don't know how long he would have been in the belly of the fish or what that creature actually was. It's a very complicated story. And I will admit I've not read as much of the commentary on that as I would like to. So there's a lot more I probably need to study on that.
I really should pay attention to these super chats. I am so sorry, ladies and gentlemen. I'm so caught up in talking with you.
You're fired.
I am so screwed. Brett, thank you for the super chat. Any thoughts on Samaritan Torah versus modern Jewish Torah? Which one has more of a claim to be correct versions from Moses? Thank you. I'm going to try and find. I think there was one more or two more or something. I'm so sorry, guys. Okay. Yes, I found it. Okay. Go ahead.
I don't know. I think the Samaritan Torah might be a little bit more reliable in certain passages, but again, it's. So I just read a book by Joseph Klawans on purity and sacrifice and whatnot, and he started talking about like some of this whatnot. And he's sort of saying like it's really hard to really know which came first, P or H. If all he's one point in the book, he says if all we have is P through the eyes of H. How do we know we really have enough of P to discern the differences there? So it's really kind of like that. It's really hard to sort of say which goes back to the oldest because we're so limited by our textual evidence because, manuscripts were not made to survive 3,000 years or 2,500 years, whatever you want to say. It's a complicated issue. And I would probably just maybe agree with Joseph Klawans. Maybe that's not the right question to ask. Maybe it's more important to what has sort of come down to us and what are they doing with this theology? What are they preserving for us? And how old can we say certain things are in this and how far would it go back? I would have a hard time really going through both of those texts and really trying to say which I would say is better. I mean, it's something that, scholars have written books upon and still come to very limited conclusions.
Interesting. Bible bloopers. Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate the question and the super chat. He didn't answer my question. Over 400,000 children a year go missing. How exactly is God helping them? They end up dead after they are tortured.
Right. And I said I didn't have time to answer that in this because I would need 2 hours. So luckily I have 2 videos up that I recommended to watch that would answer that. So
what are the names of them? Just so if someone wants to go.
The problem of evil, a Christian response. The problem of suffering, a Christian response.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate the super chat. Thank you for answering that. We got a super chat here, and then I got a question for you myself. Let's see. Question above. I'm missing a question. Let me see.
Uh-oh.
I appreciate the super chat. I hate when this happens. Okay. IP. The Sophia of Jesus Christ is proof that Christians were fabricating gospels by copying from unrelated writings. How do we know that does not apply with the canonical gospels of the New Testament?
The Sophia of Jesus Christ is proof that Christians were fabricating gospels by copying from unrelated writings. Again, I just did a video where I acknowledged that they're copying from the Old Testament. They're drawing parallels to what they're seeing right now, and they're trying to find parallels in the Old Testament to match things that are happening during the ministry of Jesus and during the life of Jesus. If they're doing that with other works, I don't see that as a problem because scholars acknowledge this. And they're fully aware of this and they understand what's actually happening when that is going on because we see it in other ancient works. So I would need a little more context with regards to the question, but I don't really see them as much of an issue.
I guess probing, you mentioned the documentary hypothesis. Where do you stand on that? I know that they're minutiae, if you will, scholars disagree over, but do you generally agree that there are 4 sources, if you will, the Pentateuch is made up of?
No, I don't. No, and I'll probably do videos on that next year. I need to get a couple more books. I just ordered a $90 book on that. And I need to order another book that I just found out is $160. So, but probably next summer I'm going to do some. Yeah,
in the consensus.
My view on that is that a lot of the arguments that people like Benjamin Klitscher, Kenneth Kitchen, for example, put forward have not been adequately addressed, and there's some pretty good information there that I want to present. But I need to I'm just not ready yet to do that. I'm not entirely opposed to the tenets of the documentary hypothesis. Like I do agree that there are multiple authors when compiling the Pentateuch. I think 4 is not enough. I would actually say pump those numbers up. Well, I mean, I did a video titled "Who Wrote the Bible? Cultural Context of the Biblical World," where I basically agree with Michael, and I quote Michael Heiser in there, where we both agree these were written over time by multiple authors, people coming in, adding things, whatnot. My problem with the documentary hypothesis is that I think it's not applying to enough of the cultural context. Kenneth Kitchen does a great job with this. There's a lot of parallels to the current form of the Pentateuch that you wouldn't see with the sources divorced, alleged sources divorced. And I think it's a little too, I don't think they're the conclusion that the different sources, if they existed, are wildly contradictory. There's no way to ever address this. Like with the naming of Beersheba or Joseph when he was taken to Egypt stories. Or
you don't think those are contradictions there in the narrative?
No. Well, let's take a look at just the one, Genesis 37. Mm-hmm. So you got these two things that are supposedly merged where they're jumping back and forth. And we're told that in one story, the Midianites came, they saw Joseph in a pit, Genesis 37:28, I believe it is. They saw they saw Joseph in a pit, pulled him out, took him, and sold him down to Egypt. In the other story, it's Joseph's brothers who sold him to the Ishmaelites, and we're told these are contradictory stories. But, I mean, Kenneth Kitchen does respond to this. He points out that, first of all, if you go to Judges 8, for example, their Midianites and Ishmaelites are used interchangeably. So it says, like, the Midianites were defeated by Gideon, and then he notes that the Ishmaelites were wearing gold jewelry. So we see right there.
I see that approach. Yeah.
But also, I mean, the other issue, of course, is what is it? It's so they're told that we're told that in Genesis 37:28 that for example, where is it that I'm looking? So we're told that the Midianites came and they sold Joseph. Now, Kenneth Kitchen points out that there are places in Deuteronomy, I think it's 22, where the pronoun does not refer to the antecedent noun. It refers to a prior noun. So that doesn't mean that necessarily it's referring to the Midianites pulling him out. It's referring to Joseph's brothers pulling him out and selling him into slavery. So, and this is, of course, confirmed again in Genesis 40. Now, again, I understand that's not a complete response. There's a lot more I would want to say on that, specifically appealing to Kenneth. If you want more on that, where Kenneth Kitchen addresses that, it's his book, Ancient Origin in the Old Testament. And I believe it's not chapter 9. It's chapter 6 is where he goes into that, and he sort of addresses that in detail. So he pulls up a couple interesting verses there, where he basically points out that trying to pull it up here really fast. So I actually have it in front of me. But yeah, he points to Deuteronomy 22:19, Deuteronomy 22:29, where the pronoun doesn't refer to the antecedent noun; it refers to a prior noun. And he basically argues in this book that that's what's sort of happening in this alleged verse that says the Midianites are selling Joseph. Now, again, I understand that it's not proof. Mm-hmm. It's an alternative interpretation, and there needs to be more there to support that interpretation. And luckily, I think in that chapter, he does provide a lot of supporting details to suggest that narrative. But that's something else.
You do a review video of Joel Baden's new book. Have you read that one? The one he did?
That is on my list. I will say I do have a copy of it. I have it right here in my Adobe Acrobat reader, ready to go. I'm currently reading a book, though, surprisingly, on the Pilgrims, which I've been wanting to read for years. I took a break and I'm reading a book on the Pilgrims, of all things.
Yeah, I'd like to see your thoughts on it, because I've heard the argument. He actually addresses this argument you're specifically talking about. But the rabbis, the rabbis for the longest thought Moses wrote these things. We're all past that now. And I'm glad we're beginning to realize, okay, no, this is happening later. There's different authors, potentially with different traditions, if that makes sense. And one of the things I must say in this whole thing, we'll move off of the documentary hypothesis. I'm not an expert in it. Neither are you. It's just us flexing our reading skills from scholars that we know. Is I find more beauty personally finding out that this is human, that these are just people with traditions that are writing narratives and stories based on their cultural situation and their current time. Their ancestors are passing these things down, whether it was oral for a long period of time, and then, of course, that's finally written or whatnot. But finding that this is human, and rather than constantly thinking the way I used to about it being purely divine and inerrant and infallible, just the question is, do you think there are contradictions in the Bible? And I mean apparent contradictions, like actual mistakes.
I mean, yeah, you can see it between Chronicles and Kings sometimes when it's like different quantities, for example. And I don't see that as an issue because, again, I don't hold to inerrancy. I don't even know what that means anymore. The way it's used today is just, it's defined in all sorts of different ways. So I just totally reject the term now. But I don't see that as an issue because the ancient authors were not thinking in modern terms of writing. They were thinking in ancient world culture type style. It's not so much about preserving exact wording. It was about preserving the message and making sure that got across. What is God theologically trying to say? What is he trying to teach through this? So in my next video titled The Misunderstood Mosaic Law, I'm going to point out there are contradictions in the Torah. But what was the Torah to begin with? Have we misunderstood the entire point of that? So, like, there's a lot more there than I think what a lot of fundamentalists and what a lot of extreme skeptics say the Bible is. And I don't deny there's a human component. Obviously, there's people that wrote this stuff down.
Right.
I'm not denying that there's human culture in here. There's human motifs, So I don't see that as a problem either. Of course, there's a human element going into this. God is working through certain people, and I want to understand the culture they were working in, why they were writing it this way and not another way. What was God trying to do through these type of people? If there is a God behind all this, so it's much more complicated, I would say, than the standard fundamentalist approach or the standard skeptical layman approach.
See, and I think what you said, the way you phrased that, minus the fact that what God was doing behind there, I would phrase that last part. Everything I agree with you on, I would just rephrase that last part and say what the authors are putting God as doing behind there, or whatever that might be, because they believe this stuff. I don't deny that for a second. They believe these things. I like to use the term superstitious, and I don't mean it derogatorily, but they believe in things that you might look at a ghost hunter and say, get out of here, or a UFO believer, or Heaven's Gate cult member, or a Millerite from, previous Jehovah's Witness church. You say, you're superstitious, but you believe in things too that, you can't really prove or account for. And someone might come along and say, superstition. Do you have any questions for me? Because I've loaded questions on you. I really appreciate your patience with these questions and taking the time to address them. We obviously disagree, but this is one of the conversations I wanted people to see that people can have, and you don't have to poo-poo each other, or we will disagree, and people in the comment section disagree with me and disagree with you, probably disagree with both of us, some of them. But do you have any questions for me?
No, I mean, I think you do a pretty good job here. I mean, obviously we don't agree. I don't think you agree with every one of your guests either. Right. I mean, I think that's pretty good that you can have these conversations. And I just want to encourage all people. Let's try to, and I know I'm not perfect with it either, but let's try to employ the principle of charity as much as possible. Let's not assume everyone is disingenuous. Let's not assume everyone is always out with an agenda and they're always trying to they're either stupid or they're evil. Look, sometimes we're just going to disagree, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Let's try our best to have more conversations like this. Let's try our best to understand where other sides are coming from. And let's not assume everyone not of our tribe is the enemy, and therefore they are either evil or stupid kind of mentality. Because I see that happening from Christians. I see it happening from Muslims. I see it happening from atheists, skeptics, you name it. It's just part of the tribalism, and we need to do our best to try to combat that and live together without at each other's throats.
I'm interviewing tonight Graham Oppie, and he's a naturalist philosopher. Because, dude, you guys, the philosophy stuff, you're going to lose me if you ever go there. But I wanted to give a compliment to Bernardo Kastrup when I interviewed him recently. The one thing I thought was interesting when we got into the mind concept of God and the universe, right? He said, well, the mind, this, what you would call God, right, is trying to figure things out, is his angle, right? You heard the interview, right?
Oh, yeah, I love that interview. I thought it was great. I mean, I didn't agree with everything he said, but he's really intelligent. Yeah.
This is what I was going to ask you your thoughts on. Is he acts like, and he said, well, he thinks that the mind behind this is kind of imperfect. The way he described it, it's imperfect. It's trying to figure things out. It's trying to figure itself out, so to speak. And to me, if there was something, and I were to grant that to be the case, because I'm not a philosopher and I don't really have all these answers and understanding, that makes a lot of sense to me. That something's trying to figure stuff out because it doesn't have it all figured out. Are you an open theist in some way, or
no?
Okay, so you would disagree wholeheartedly with his analysis on the mind of.
Yeah, I think there's something more interesting than what God is trying to do here, and so I detail that in I talk about it in my video on hell. I talk about it in my video on divine hiddenness. I talk about it most recently in my video on suffering. So that would be my response. I think there's something different what God is trying to do, and it's something he's trying to do with his creation.
Interesting. Thank you. We have to you, Ajar. Thank you for the super chat. IP believers use the Bible to prove the existence of God and Jesus. How one book full of claims revised too many times is evidence of their existence where there's no physical proof.
Well, I remind everybody uses the Bible as historical sources. I mean, we want to know what Paul believed. Well, we got to go see what Paul actually said, even from a naturalistic perspective. I mean, Bart Ehrman uses the Bible to argue for certain historical facts. Just because the Bible is there doesn't mean it does not contain truth or does not contain things that could be argued for or that we can present evidence to support or whatnot. So I don't think you can use it to prove God's existence. Again, I don't think history works in proof. I think it works in what is the most probable, most plausible. And yeah, it has claims, but I reject the notion that claims are not evidence. I mean, I could claim right now that I have my keys in my pocket. Now I've given you testimony that my keys are in my pocket. That qualifies as evidence. So I don't think just because you can call it claims that somehow means it cannot be evidence. It depends on the merit of the evidence and how we can judge that evidence. That's where the debate is to be had.
Oh God, you got me. I got to ask the next question. Then you're going to screw yourself with me, man. I hate doing people dirty like this.
Gross.
I know, right? I'll make this my last one because I do want you to come back and we should definitely have interfaith dialogue, debates on MythVision, or even discussions. I prefer discussions because debate is whip it out. How long is it? Mine's longer than yours. You know, that's usually what I see.
My beard is longer than yours. So there.
I will admit yours is longer than mine. Okay. The debate is over. What you just said though, makes me question, like, people don't rise from the dead. Like, you know, for me, it's like, I'm not going to say it couldn't happen. I guess it's possible, but it's like, that's not good enough for me. Right. And for you, it's the cumulative case. I keep saying that because I'm actually trying to be reasonable and not strawman you at all. I guess it's going to come down to that, and that'll require another episode where you build up your why you think it is like sufficient that people believe that he rose from the dead and their belief in his resurrection. If there were real people who actually did believe these things, and I'm going to just assume that's the case, why you would trust that testimony versus someone who might say Muhammad did this, or someone who Ramaz, whatever the God might be, you know what I mean? Or whatever the claim might be. Why do we trust their testimony instead of some other testimony? So
right. And that's a good question to have. And I don't think that's the end of the conversation. And I also don't think that I understand where you're coming from, that just seems like that's not enough kind of attitude. Yeah. It then becomes, what is the supporting evidence for that? And of course, that's a long conversation to have. And I'm always happy to come back. Just give me a year because I'm pretty busy for the summer. And then I got another semester of grad school that I want to finish up. And so I want to focus on that.
Okay.
I am so behind on videos right now, and I'm so annoyed by it because grad school has been all my professors last semester needed so much, and I don't have time to work on videos. So luckily I was already ahead. So now I'm trying to catch up. So that's what I'm trying to do this summer.
There's so much to say about the faith thing too, that you were talking about early on. I have faith that this seat, I hear this one all the time. I sit in the seat 2,000 times. I have faith it's going to hold me. And every time I sit, boom, it's there. I might've had one chair break on me in the past. Actually more than one. I'm not going to lie. There's been quite a few chairs that have somehow broke. I've gained quite a bit of weight since COVID. But nonetheless, I have faith.
Right? Who hasn't?
Right. If we're using it like there's evidence to support what we believe, and then you wanted to define faith that way, for me, man, I have faith people don't rise from the dead. The reason why is because it just doesn't happen. And I wish to answer your question at the end of the day, just if God could appear to me, that'd be cool, you know, and like just prove it. That would be cool for me, you know.
Well, but I will dust off my feet and talk to the next person in the other town.
Talk to him, let him know I'm looking for him. He can hear me now. I'm teasing here. Ladies and gentlemen, please go to the Patreon, join, check it out. I've got all the videos. In fact, this is the guy right here we were talking about earlier on the Exodus, Dr. Ronald Hindle. He actually dates the Hebrew Bible. He takes a balanced approach. It's not maximalist. It's not minimalist. It's in between. And he does a really good job. The idea of the brain, this is a fascinating interview. Dr. Ehrman just interviewed him yesterday, of course, and just a bunch of other interviews. And literally, I'm not exaggerating when I say hundreds of interviews that have not been released to the public are on the Patreon. And last of all, which they say the first shall be last and the last shall be first. Well, you're the first. So here we have. Make sure you subscribe to his channel. What should we expect from you in upcoming weeks?
So I'm going to do a 3-part series on the Mosaic Law, the Torah, misunderstood, imperfect, revolutionary. So 3 videos, 3 different angles, just sort of building on each one. Then I'm going to do a video on the Book of Jasher. Ever since I did my recent Gilgamesh video, I've been getting comments about the serpent in Gilgamesh and how that supposedly, people keep commenting that, well, Genesis must have plagiarized that part. So I'm going to do a video on other Mesopotamian legends like Gilgamesh and comparing it to like the Eden narrative. So I'll be doing Adapa, Enkian, and Hersog, Gilgamesh as well, and just talking about why I don't think those parallels are sufficient, some of the scholarly commentary on there. I'm going to do some videos on cultural context, so honor and shame. I'm going to do a video on arguing that the New Testament actually teaches virtue ethics, not a form of deontology. So I'm going to argue that Paul actually quotes Aristotle sometimes and is advocating for a Christian form of virtue ethics. So that's what I have planned out for the rest of the year. I'm going to do a video on Thanksgiving probably and the origins and why I don't think it's racist. So yeah, a lot of interesting stuff coming up.
A lot of haters going to come out of the woodwork. And
you bet they will.
I'm really glad that we came on and we had a cordial conversation, even though we don't agree at the end of the day on this conclusion. That's the reason we should have these, is to make it's okay if you believe, it's okay if you don't. It's one of the things that I want to start to do. So thank you so much, Michael. If you have anything else to say, speak now or forever hold your peace. All right. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Derek Lambert. Michael Jones, Inspiring Philosophy. Thank you, man, for joining me. I appreciate you taking all these punches in a kind way. I was gently,
You're great. You're great. Don't worry.
I really appreciate it. And never forget, we are MythVision. Peace, everybody.